think we're good. Madam City Clerk, are we ready to go?
We are live. Yes, ma'am.
All right. Well, I'm going to call this meeting to order in compliance with California Governor Gavin Newsom's executive order to protect public health and prevent the spread of COVID-19. This City Council meeting study session is being conducted via teleconference on the city's website and is also provided on a wide array of streaming media platforms to offer access to the public to the fullest extent possible. WehoTV staff have confirmed that this City Council meeting is currently streaming successfully on Spectrum Channel 10 and online at weho.org/WehoTV. In addition, and as a courtesy, this meeting is also successfully streaming on the city's YouTube channel at youtube.com/WehoTV and on Roku, Apple TV, Fire TV, and Android TV. WehoTV staff monitor this broadcast on all platforms throughout the meeting and will notify the city clerk and council should broadcast disruptions arise. Please do not interrupt the live meeting by calling or texting the city council about difficulties viewing the meeting. If you're experiencing viewing difficulties while watching this live stream, please reload the page or visit weho.org/WehoTV to access our official live stream and to view a list of other available streaming options. In addition, you may call in to listen to this meeting by dialing 669-900-6833. Meeting ID is 826-5470-6632, and then press the pound sign. Please understand that internet speeds, device reliability, third-party platform reliability, and individual or personal technical issues are out of the scope of this broadcast. WehoTV staff has published a guide at weho.org/WehoTV to troubleshoot your connection. Apparently Winston also says hello, and I'll now turn it to our city clerk for a roll call.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember D'Amico.
Yes.
Councilmember Erickson.
Yes.
Councilmember Shine.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Meister.
Here.
Mayor Horvath.
Here.
We have a quorum.
And I'll turn it to our city clerk or city attorney for a report of our closed session agenda.
Thank you, Mayor Horvath. The City Council convened a closed session meeting this evening at 5 p.m. There were no members of the public who came to speak on the agenda items. There was only one item of business listed on the posted agenda. The council only spoke about this one item of business and took no reportable action. The meeting adjourned at 5:10 p.m. That concludes my report.
Thank you very much. And our next item is approval of tonight's agenda. If there are no changes, I'd entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, Madam City Clerk.
Councilmember D'Amico.
Yes.
Councilmember Erickson.
Yes.
Councilmember Shine. I saw you, but I didn't hear you. Sorry.
Yes.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Meister.
Yes.
Mayor Horvath.
Aye.
The agenda is approved.
And we have one item on our agenda tonight, which is the study session on the City of West Hollywood's living wage and minimum wage. This study session will function similarly to the cannabis study session we had some years ago, to allow us to dive into all of the aspects of the issue before us tonight. Our city staff will first provide a report. Then the city council will have opportunity to ask questions. We're going to spend a little more time probably asking questions than we typically do in a city council meeting, so we can get into some of the substance and to provide an opportunity for those who may comment from our public to hear from the council and respond to some of those questions. People who are participating from the public will have 2 minutes to speak, and the council will have the opportunity to ask additional questions or seek additional input from our speakers if we need it. And from there, council will be able to provide further direction, just to give a sense of how the flow of tonight is expected to go anyway. So I will now, at this point, if my colleagues have no questions, turn it over to our staff for a report.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, and City Council members. So this study session is to discuss the city's living wage and minimum wage. I will provide a brief overview of staff's recommendations, after which City Attorney Langer will talk about the purpose of study sessions. Then Janet Jimenez will provide about a 20-minute staff report. And we also have John Leonard, Tara Warden, Paulo Cesperdit are all available for questions. After staff's presentation, we'll be able to answer questions as the mayor described. We'll be available for questions and answers with the council and then hear public comment. So at the February 1st, 2021 meeting, the City Council directed staff to evaluate and research adjustments to the living wage and minimum wage. The business development team took the lead on this work. This was in addition to their work with assisting businesses through the impacts of the pandemic with the out zones and constant changing health orders and adjusting regulations. So I do appreciate the work that the business development team and the city attorney's office did to gather the information that's provided in the staff report, especially during these unusual times. The City Council, if the City Council wishes to pursue any significant changes to the living wage or minimum wage, staff recommends further stakeholder outreach and engagement, as well as further analysis by an independent third party. Page 21 of the staff report provides 11 questions to better inform the direction of any additional study, in addition to any other direction you all provide tonight. If the City Council elects to make any significant changes to the living wage or minimum wage tonight in the form of actual rate increases, staff recommends that those changes do not go into effect before the start of next fiscal year, which is July 1st of 2022, or the next calendar year, July 1st, 2023, to allow businesses the time to make adjustments for those changes. And hopefully we will be further down the road towards recovery at that time. So now I'll turn it over to Lauren Langer to talk about the purpose of study sessions.
Thank you, David. My comments will be briefer than I thought because the mayor gave a very good introduction to how tonight's meeting will go. We haven't done many of these staff reports, as the mayor mentioned. I think the last one was for the cannabis ordinance back in 2017. But it's really it's a regular city council meeting, but it's focused. It allows the council and staff to really devote the time needed to dig into complex topics without having to rush through to get to other agenda items and a long agenda. So it allows for a focused discussion, allows for the council to hear from the public. There's no specific rules as to what can and cannot be done at a study session. However, I'll note for the public, there are no ordinances being considered tonight. There's no resolutions that could be adopted tonight. It's for the purpose of learning, of studying the topic, and then at the end of the meeting, the city council can provide direction to staff on future actions that they want brought back at a future meeting. So if you notice on the agenda, the structure of the study session, there's 4 parts, which are the introduction and overview, and Janet will provide her staff report, then probably in-depth question and answer, then public comment, and then I think when you get to item number 4, city council comment and direction, the council can discuss among themselves the goal for the meeting, what they want to get out of it, and what type of direction collectively you want to provide to staff. There's some questions at the end of the staff report that could help guide that discussion, but after you hear from staff and hear from public, you might have other thoughts. So those questions are there to guide you, and item 4 on the staff report will be an opportunity to provide direction to staff as needed. So with that, I'll turn it over to Janet to begin her presentation.
Thank you, Lauren. So good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, council members, and members of the public. I am Janet Jimenez, assistant to the city manager. In addition to our city manager, David Wilson, and city attorney, Lauren Langer, I'm accompanied tonight by John Leonard, community and legislative affairs manager, Tara Warden, business development analyst, and Paulo Cesperdit, management specialist. As city manager David Wilson shared with you earlier, this year, the city council directed staff to report on how the city's living wage is calculated, how the living wage is calculated as it relates to healthcare benefits, research establishing a requirement for the living wage to apply to development projects, and to review how the state's minimum wage relates to the city's minimum wage. The item before you tonight is an overview of the city's current living wage, how it's been calculated to date, comparison to other cities' living wages, an overview of the city's history as it pertains to a local minimum wage rates in other cities, feedback from both workers and businesses, along with data from West Hollywood's workforce. As David mentioned, this evening, staff is seeking direction from the City Council on the following items, and they're the questions that are listed on page 21 of the staff report. Regarding the city's living wage, they are A, should the city continue to have a living wage? B, should the current living wage rate be adjusted to a higher amount? C, should the city continue to use a two-tiered approach for the living wage, including a rate for employees who provide healthcare benefits and a different wage for employees who do not provide healthcare? D, should the living wage be applied to more than only city contractors? And E, should development agreements be subject to a living wage, or should the city continue to evaluate this on a case-by-case basis? With regards to the minimum wage, the questions are A, should the city potentially establish a local city minimum wage that is higher than the current state's rate? If so, what general rate for the rate should be studied? B, should staff consider a phased approach for any potential increases similar to the state's approach and that of neighboring cities who have previously adopted their own local minimum wage? And C, should staff consider any other considerations for any potential local city minimum wage, for example, sick leave or sector-specific wages? So I'll go through the main items of the staff report, provide an overview, and then look to council for direction. Are there any other questions at this time before we proceed into the report? Okay. So a living wage. Some might ask, what is in fact a living wage? So a living wage is typically described as the minimum income necessary for a worker to be able to meet basic needs for an extended period of time. These needs can include shelter, nutrition, healthcare, and other incidentals such as clothing. Living wage is often further defined as the wage equivalent to the poverty line for a family of four. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services federal poverty level for 2021 for a family of four is $26,500, which equates to a wage of at least $12.74 per hour. The state of California's Department of Housing and Community Development publishes annual family income limits by county for household qualification. For LA County, a family of four is considered extremely low income if their household income is below $35,450, which equates to a wage of about $17.04 per hour. The 2021 median income of a family of four in LA County is $80,000. So how did we get here in terms of the city's living wage? So the city's first adopted its living wage ordinance in 1997, and it applied to city contracts in excess of $25,000 with a term of at least 3 months. The initial rate in 1997 was $7.25 per hour for those employers providing healthcare benefits and $8.50 per hour for those employers not providing benefits, a difference of $1.25 an hour. In comparison, the state's minimum wage at that time in 97 was $5 per hour. Each subsequent year since the ordinance was adopted in 1997, the living wage was adjusted annually on average by 2%. In 2004, the City Council amended the city's living wage ordinance to adjust the rate to correspond with the cost of living adjustments through CalPERS, which was set at 2% annually. Then in 2011, the council once again amended the ordinance to adjust the living wage rate annually based on the January to January CPI. And that adjustment comes before the council for approval every year in May and goes into effect on July 1st. So the main question is, how is a wage calculated, whether it's a living wage or a minimum wage? Staff research shows that data is limited on cities' initial methodology in determining an appropriate living and/or minimum wage. There's no simple formula or process that is regularly used to calculate a wage, and there's numerous factors involved. For example, when the city of Los Angeles was exploring their own local minimum wage, their city council's economic development committee chose the UC Berkeley Institute for Research on Labor and Employment to provide analysis on minimum wage rates and increases, which also informed them setting their own living wage. At that time, other cities modeled after them and used the same studies. They presented their committee to develop their local minimum wage. So the table before you shows the hour living wages in various other cities in California. You'll note that the only constant among the 8 cities is that their annual increase is based on CPI. Additionally, 3 of the cities listed don't have a 2-tiered approach to their respective living wage rates, meaning they don't have 2 different wages for those employers that provide healthcare versus those that don't. So it's the same across the board. As previously stated, the council also asked staff to look at the city's living wage rate and healthcare benefits and the impacts of the Affordable Care Act. Under the Affordable Care Act, households between 0 and 150% of the federal poverty level do not have to pay any of their household income towards healthcare premiums. Based on the city's current living wage of $15.16 per hour for businesses that do not provide healthcare benefits, a fully employed single income household earns roughly $31,533 per year based on a 40-hour work week. A household of 1 individual earning the city's living wage and not receiving healthcare benefits from their employer would be eligible for reduced cost healthcare, but not eligible for free healthcare. All other households above a single individual would receive free healthcare though. Staff was also asked to research establishing a requirement for the living wage to apply to development projects. City Council discussed this issue back in 2011, and at that time decided not to implement a blanket rule requiring living wage on development projects. Rather, the term could be negotiated on a case-by-case basis depending on the specific project. It's not common to see this type of term in development agreements because it affects future tenants or operators and may not be practical depending on the use mix of the final project. Staff would like to note that during the construction phase of development projects, many of the workers on site are compensated well above the city's current living wage due to the various trades needed throughout the construction project. So we'll switch gears a little bit now to a minimum wage. So a minimum wage is the lowest hourly wage an employer can pay an employee for their work. Currently, the federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. Some states and cities across the country have raised their minimum wage well above the federal minimum wage. Currently, 29 states and the District of Columbia have adopted higher wages than that of the federal rate. As previously mentioned, the city of West Hollywood currently adheres to the state of California's minimum wage. So now we'll go into a little bit of the history of past discussions regarding a local minimum wage. So back in September of 2014, the City Council adopted a resolution in support of increasing the federal minimum wage and directed staff to research whether there was a need or justification to adopt a local minimum wage ordinance in West Hollywood. Throughout 2015, the City Council received numerous updates from staff regarding regional minimum wage policies and efforts at the state level to raise the minimum wage. In March of 2016, the City Council directed the city attorney to prepare an ordinance establishing a phased approach to a local minimum wage. At that point, the direction was that the wage would start at $12 an hour as of July 1st, 2017 for businesses with 26 or more employees. And for small businesses, they would get a 1-year deferral, small businesses being 25 or less employees, as well as nonprofits. And that 1 year deferral would go into effect July 1st, 2018, where they would start also at $12 an hour. Shortly thereafter that meeting, in early April, then Governor Jerry Brown signed a statewide minimum wage law, which became effective January 1st of 2017, and will eventually reach $15 an hour for all businesses as of January 1st, 2023. So at that time, Paula can go back one slide, sorry. So in August of 2016, the council voted not to implement a local minimum wage as they had initially directed staff in March, but rather follow the state's minimum wage. Thank you. So currently, this is the state's minimum wage. Again, it's a phased approach. Currently, employers with 26 or more employees are legally required to compensate their employees at a minimum of $14 an hour, and small businesses of 25 or less employees at $13 an hour. The next increase for both small and large businesses is January 1st, 2022. So for large businesses, the wage will be $15 an hour. For the small businesses, it will be $14 an hour. And as of January 1st, 2023, all businesses in the state, regardless of employee size, will be required to compensate their employees a minimum of $15 an hour. So this is a table of minimum wage comparisons to other cities, both in our region and in Northern California. So of the cities that have adopted a local minimum wage ordinance, some have included additional provisions or sector-specific wages. For example, the city of Los Angeles included additional sick leave provisions in their ordinance. Currently, under state law, an employee accrues 1 hour of sick leave for every 30 hours worked. LA's ordinance requires an employer to front load 48 hours of sick leave or adhere to the state law. Additionally, accrued unused paid sick leave may be carried over to the following year and capped at a minimum of 72 hours. The city of Santa Monica also included a sick leave provision in their ordinance. Small businesses with 25 or less employees are required to provide 40 hours of sick leave to each employee, and large businesses of 26 or more employees are required to provide 72 hours of paid sick leave. And similar to the LA ordinance, Santa Monica allows for a business to front load the sick leave at the start. The cities of Long Beach, LA, Oakland, and Santa Monica have adopted different wage schedules for hotel workers and or concession workers. Additionally, the city of LA has adopted a different wage schedule for their Los Angeles airport employees. So sub-minimum wage. This topic was discussed previously in 2016, and staff shared with council the legal challenges of implementing a local sub-minimum wage or a total compensation provision. Sub-minimum wage is a two-tiered wage system that permits an employer to pay less than the minimum wage to tipped employees who customarily and regularly receive at least $30 per month in tips. This is also known as a tip credit. Currently, the federal sub-minimum wage is $2.13 per hour, and the maximum tip credit an employer can claim is $5.21 per hour, which is roughly 30% of the federal minimum wage rate of $7.25 per hour. Previously, the city of Sacramento attempted to include a total compensation provision when they were exploring adopting their own local minimum wage around the time that the state signed their law, and that provision was deemed illegal by the California's Office of Legislative Counsel. So even if the city were to implement its own local minimum wage, a sub-minimum wage, i.e. tip credit or total compensation, wouldn't be something that we would be able to include. So the question is always, what are the potential benefits of a minimum wage policy? So per staff's literature review of recent policy and scholastic debates, the following are potential benefits when increasing wages. Increased wages increase the average earnings of an affected worker, which leads to a reduction in income inequality and a reliance on government public assistance programs. There are long-term social benefits among the affected workers, including improved morale, health, and more leisure time. And there's also a reduction in employee turnover, which potentially can offset increased payroll costs because there's not a constant turnover of having to hire and train new employees. Contrary, what are the potential costs of a minimum wage policy? There's the potential for a loss of jobs, and employers may substitute the more expensive low-skilled workers with a combination of labor-saving technology, capital, and higher skilled labor. Businesses may pass along the increased labor costs to the consumer by increasing the price of goods, which in turn reduces demand and may impact or reduce the employer's need for labor. And businesses may leave the market altogether or relocate to a more affordable area. So now we're going to go and look at the workforce for West Hollywood. So the table before you is a quick snapshot of the city's largest workforce sectors. Some key takeaways from this data is that food services and drinking places is the largest subsector with 17% of overall workforce in 2019 pre-pandemic and roughly 12% of the overall workforce in 2020. The reported wages of food services and drinking places, not including tips, was at roughly $634 a week, or an average $15.85 per hour for a full-time employee. What this data reflects is that West Hollywood businesses are already compensating their employees above the current state's minimum wage. And this is similar to the data that was presented to the City Council back in 2016 when we looked at similar data from the California EDD. What staff has found that a minimum wage increase will have the largest effect on low wage industries. These industries will experience the most dramatic increase in payroll costs, leading to increases in operating costs. From this chart, employees and social assistants will experience the largest benefit from a minimum wage increase. A majority of social assistance jobs are classified as services for the elderly and persons with disabilities, and an increase in cost of care could prohibit or limit access to these services. So as part of our research and our work, staff did conduct outreach meetings to both workforce and businesses. With regards to the workforce, staff conducted 2 virtual workforce meetings hosted via Zoom. Amongst the 2 meetings, there were 43 individuals in attendance, with 36% of the workers in the hotel industry. Hourly wages of the attendees were greater than the current minimum wage. The general feedback from the workers was that an increase in the minimum wage would help many absorb the increasing cost of goods and eliminate the need to obtain a second job. Workers also shared that the current pandemic has left them with little to no savings. With regards to the businesses, staff conducted a business roundtable, also via Zoom, and 40 business owners and managers attended. The general feedback from the businesses is that the hospitality industry has been hit the hardest during the pandemic, and any increases to wages at this time would hinder their recovery. Increased payroll costs would be offset by increased cost of goods and potentially reducing staff. So the question now, how does the living wage and minimum wage intersect? This graph provides a comparison of the city's living wage to the state's minimum wage schedule based on increases using a 10-year average annual CPI adjustment of 2%. Based on these estimates and the assumption that no changes are made to the state's current minimum wage, the state minimum wage requirement of $14 per hour for small businesses will surpass the floor of the city's living wage of $13.91 per hour in approximately January of 22. So how do hourly wages, both living and minimum wage, compare across the region? So this table compares California cities and their current living wage and minimum wage for 2021. In most cities, the living wage is higher than the respective minimum wage, except for two cities. Exceptions being the city of Pasadena, whose living wage is less than their minimum wage, and the city of Los Angeles, whose living wage is the same as their minimum wage. So we're back to where we started. So as we read at the start of the presentation, before you are the items to consider both on the living wage and on the next slide, the minimum wage. And based on council's direction this evening, staff is recommending the following potential next steps. Should the council choose to move forward with any of the items listed above, potential next steps include the creation of a living wage, minimum wage working group comprising workers, businesses, advocacy groups, and community members, a citywide survey of West Hollywood workers, expert input from Labor Center, either UCLA or UC Berkeley, for example, and commission an independent economic study of potential impacts to the businesses, the workforce, and the residents if a local minimum wage is implemented. That concludes staff presentation, and we're available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We can now turn to council questions. And who would like to begin? Councilmember D'Amico.
Thanks. I just have a couple of clarifications for Janet. So in the living wage discussion, the question of 150% of poverty, what is that figure? Is that $20,000 times 150% or $12,000 times 150%? Because you said that at $15 per hour, which is $30,000, employees would still be required to purchase insurance. And I just got a little lost in the earlier slide, 3 or 4 slides earlier, in which you said that the poverty level was $20-some thousand. So I think that's something I need to understand more. And then I guess the further question about living wage with insurance versus living wage without insurance, and living wage with insurance at a large employer. If a large employer provides insurance, it's my understanding, having worked for large employers most of my career, that they take a portion of the employee's wages to pay for insurance. So I'm wondering if you can explain what the thinking was, that if you worked for a large employer, you would get paid less if you got insurance, versus if you didn't work for a large employer, you would get paid more, when both have costs. So I maybe those questions can't be answered this evening, but that was the thrust of my questioning. Generally, before, you couldn't buy insurance, there was no exchange, you were left without insurance. So, potentially you couldn't just go out and find insurance if you were running errands for someone and they were paying you a minimum wage. But now you can, and I understand somewhere in there is the threshold at which you have to start paying. But if you work for an employer and they buy insurance for you, they almost always charge the employee for a portion of that cost.
Correct. But I will defer to John Leonard to address this as his expertise in the report.
So I'll start by addressing the way that we calculated or determined if an employee would need to pay for health insurance. We simply looked at the covered California rates and the subsidies that are provided within the state. We determined how much an individual would make if they were making the living wage within the city, how much they would make per year. And then we looked at the subsidy rates. And by looking at the subsidy rates for both individuals and families, the only household type that we found that would have to pay anything for an insurance plan based on the subsidies would be a single person earning the living wage. Anybody or any other type of household, whether it be 2 people and only 1 person is earning the living wage, or an individual with a child, they would all be, that they would receive subsidies in the amount to fully cover their healthcare. So that's how we determined that. We were really trying to determine if a household making just the living wage would have to pay anything for healthcare. And to address the second component of that, in many cases, when an employer provides healthcare, they are still charging the employer. Our current breakdown, where you either receive the additional amount or you don't, doesn't take that into credit either. Because if you're receiving healthcare from an employer, you're still receiving that lower living wage amount, even if you're required to pay something to your employer for it. It was just based on whether the employer provides healthcare coverage to you or not. It didn't take into account whether the employer is fully paying that cost for you or whether you have to pay something as well from the employer.
So is it fair to conclude that for single people, whether they work for a large company or a small company that provides insurance or not, a portion of their wage needs to is taken or spent on health insurance? And so to pay a lower amount than another means you're putting perhaps one group at a disadvantage at the end of the day, at their take-home pay.
Yes, potentially there is a likelihood that single individuals are going to have to pay something for healthcare. I would note that even though the Covered California rates require some sort of a payment, it's a pretty highly subsidized payment. One of the items we looked at was the difference between the rate with health insurance or without is $1.25 per hour. That equated to about $200 per month for the individual. The single individual that was purchasing a healthcare plan through Covered California with the subsidies was paying between $50 and $100 a month. So the amount they were paying was still less than the differential between the two wages.
And I guess just one last question about this, and then I think I'm finished asking questions for now. So I guess if we're going to continue this discussion, I would maybe like to know what places like Starbucks or Target or Ralph's charge their employees for health insurance, even if we can't get the exact rate, but for those lower wage, closer to minimum wage employees.
Sure.
And Councilmember D'Amico, if I could just add that employers with 50 or more full-time employees are required to provide full coverage to their employees. So healthcare is provided.
But not fully subsidized, just full coverage.
Full coverage without, or there's a tax penalty. So 49 employees or less, they're not. So there could be out-of-pocket expenses for the employee.
I understand, Janet, but I actually think full coverage is different than fully subsidized healthcare. Full coverage just means they have to provide it so that the employee can purchase it, not that they have to provide it for free. So I'm just trying to understand this world that we're in the world of Obamacare, in which coverage is required, and whether you pay your employer or your employer takes part of your wages or you buy it yourself, how much does it cost? And why would we pay an employee differently if there's a cost that they don't have a choice in paying? That's my theory question that I'd like to get answered. Thank you.
And we can look into that. And we can also look at if there's a very minimum baseline that larger employers are required to provide. And then if there's a difference if employees go higher. So we can look into all of that.
Any additional questions? Mayor Pro Tem Meister.
Thank you, Mayor. So I have a couple of questions about the report. Regarding the worker roundtable, when I looked at it, it didn't appear that any restaurant business employees were at either of the roundtables. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
So did we make any attempt at outreach for those, for that industry, since that industry is the highest percentage in terms of our workforce in West Hollywood?
Yeah, outreach to employees is a little difficult, and we outlined that a couple factors caused that. One was just the lack of engagement. We heard from some business managers and owners that getting their employees to attend a Zoom meeting outside of their normal work functions was increasingly difficult. But we did try to at least communicate to a lot of business owners in particular to invite their restaurant employees to attend this meeting, but none showed up.
And so can we consider, if we're going to pursue this further in the future, can we consider doing an easy SurveyMonkey survey that they might be more apt to answer, and make it clear that it's anonymous so they can answer honestly about wages and their tips?
Yes, that is something that we can do.
Great. And then Janet, you talked about that tipped employees can't be have a different set of rules in terms of the minimum wage. But can an industry be exempt from an increased minimum wage? Because I know that an industry can be picked out as having a higher minimum wage. I mean, I think that's how I understand it. But is there a way of doing this so that an industry can be exempt from a higher minimum wage if, for example, they're receiving tips?
So it would be the opposite. So we have sector-specific wages, like we talked about, hotel industry or airport workers. If the council were to move forward with the wage, potentially it could be just for a specific subset, but I don't know if City Attorney Langer has anything else to add in terms of the legalities of it. Because it's normally not done that way for exempting a specific sector.
Well, yeah, I'd be interested in finding that out.
Okay.
My understanding is that Pasadena has an exemption in their ordinance, their minimum wage ordinance. So I would like to be able to understand when that can apply and when it can't apply. And I don't know if the city attorney wants to answer now, or she just wants to look into that. If we give direction later to pursue this conversation. Then also, I was interested in the sector, the social assistance sector, and what occupations that included, because it looked like that was the lowest paying of our industries, of our top industries in terms of their minimum wage or wages. Does anyone know what?
I can answer that question for you, Mayor Pro Tem. It looks like, so the social assistance category encompasses 3 different sort of subsectors. The first being, and this is the majority of our workforce in this category, it's about 99% of people employed in social assistance. The industry specific is services for the elderly and persons with disability. The other is child daycare services, and the third is other individuals and family services. And those are much smaller categories. They employ 60 people and 47 people respectively.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I think it's important to know what those occupations are and who could be impacted if the wages are raised. So that's important to know. Those are my questions for now. Thank you.
Councilmember Shine.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a few questions. I'm going to go one by one. I'd like to know first, what are all the social service contracts that will be affected by any living wage change?
So the city collectively has over 400 contracts with social service providers, facilities contracts, security, parking enforcement across the board. So if the council were to move forward with any changes to the living wage, Staff would have to do some analysis and come back to determine what that impact would be collectively to all of the city's contracts. But David Juni can speak specifically to the social service contracts.
Good evening, council. The social services contracts already require that the contractors provide a living wage. Qualitatively, I can tell you that they all exceed what the current living wage is. So there would be an impact. It potentially depends on how much the increase is.
Thank you. And then what other contracts? I know there's going to be a discussion about development agreements. I'm not referring to those. Other than the social service contracts, are there any other contracts that you didn't mention that would be affected by the living wage?
So any contracts for the city that provide labor services to the city. So again, janitorial, parking operations, security, transit, and any additional janitorial staff that we bring on when West Hollywood Park is open and we have to operate the ARC, the Aquatics and Recreation Center.
Thank you. Do we have, you gave me a number of over 400 contracts. Were these included in that 400? Over 400?
Yes.
And
I don't know if the new contracts for the new operations of the park would be included in that number, but the active annual contracts that we have right now is roughly 400.
And of these roughly 400, do they have all different start dates, or is it collectively most of them start mid-year? I think I heard the city manager saying July 1st as a potential implementation of something. So do they mostly start July 1st, or do they have all of a different start date?
I think so. Of the 400, a lot of them have different start dates, but of our annual contracts that are usually done by our facilities group, which include our janitorial services, our landscape services, the services that are will be most impacted, those are July 1st to June 30th contracts. Those are typically for the fiscal year.
Thank you. Thank you. So then my next question is, I would really appreciate if you could break down the poverty level wages so the public can understand it a little bit more aside from the long staff report. And also please tie that into and address our community study data with respect to the increase of the poverty level in West Hollywood, as well as what our median household income is according to the community study.
I see David, yes.
So I can address the second 2 points, Councilmember Shine, to your question. In the 2019 community study, we did see a 1% increase in households that fell below the poverty level. It went from 13% to 14%. We saw an increase. Now this information, there's more current information that was provided in the staff report, but at the time of the community study, the median increase, or the median income had increased over the previous study by $9,000 annually. It went from $52,009 to $61,127. I think that answered your second 2 points.
Yes, and what median income do we have new data on the median income now? Or are we relying on the community study?
I think Janet reported on the median income for LA, I believe, right, Janet, which was now at 80,000. I believe that the city of West Hollywood is approximately 66,000.
66,000. And when discussing poverty level wages, you were discussing in the staff report the federal poverty level wages. What about and when you were referring to it what was that number? the federal poverty level, Janet, for that you discussed under the wages?
So the federal poverty level for a family of four in 2021 is 26,500.
Okay. And what about the, when you referred to it for the city of West Hollywood, I guess we switched terms. It was very low income rather than poverty level. Is that correct? Or do we have that's kind of the way I was
So that's
reading it.
that terminology is the state of California's Department of Housing and Community Development when they're looking at family income by county for household qualification.
Okay.
Yes, those are the income tiers for affordable housing rates. Because they're specific to California, they're much higher than the federal poverty line because the federal poverty line looks at everybody throughout the country. So it's not as high as it would be if it were just looking at California. So those income brackets in California were included because they are higher and represent kind of where the poverty or extremely low income line would be in California and Los Angeles County, which was approximately, I think it was $34,000.
Thank you. That's the number I was looking for, 34. That makes sense because it's higher cost of living in California. LA. Okay. Thank you so much. My next question, in regard to a worker survey, who would create that survey? And if it's not us, how much would that cost?
We don't know the exact cost. If the council would direct us to do further study, we would more than likely do an RFP to hire a consultant or an outside firm to do both the economic study and any survey needed and have them administer it confidentially.
And if we did do an RFP, could we put in requirements for how many workers we would want to reach? And thank you for the confidentiality. I am also, our own surveys have been, unfortunately, I think we need to figure out when we do our own surveys how to make sure one person doesn't do 10 entries, because the Pet Memorial as well as RBG survey allow multiple entries by one person, which I don't know what to do with that kind of data. So could we ensure through an RFP that through our experience with past vendors, that it's only one person that could take the survey one time?
Yeah, I can address that. Yes, we can. In our past surveys, when we've hired professional survey firms, it's typically $40,000 to $50,000 per survey. This may be a little bit more because it's a little bit more involved and complicated to reach specific workers instead of just reaching any individual in the city. But there are ways to ensure that there aren't duplicate responses from individuals.
And are there ways to make sure that the workers, I know I appreciate the confidentiality, to make sure the workers are taking it and not the employers?
I don't know of specific ways, but I would assume that the professional survey firms could find a way to do that and could work to do that with those employees.
Thank you. With respect to the advocacy groups for the working group question, with regard to the advocacy groups, who would be included in that advocacy group? What are you all thinking about that?
Tara, Paula, do you want to?
I think we would want a team of folks that include labor unions or labor unions that work generally in the LA region, and also representatives of our business community like the Chamber or the LA LGBT Chamber, or additional business organizations that are involved in the West Hollywood economy.
Okay. And how would that working group be organized and how would it function?
It would work. I would say I can feel free to jump in, Paulo or Janet. But in concert with, depending on the direction tonight from council, if there were an additional economic study or survey needs, that the committee would give input on recommendations or sort of brainstorm creative ideas on how to better address wage inequality in the city. We can certainly work on goals of the working committee. But in general, I think they would work to address the direction at council.
And if I may chime in on that particular point. So if council does direct staff to hire a firm and go through an RFP process to conduct a study, we would also probably put this on the firm as well, so that they're a third-party independent firm that is conducting these work groups. Once again, we're really concerned about the confidentiality piece of it, so we want to make sure that a third-party firm is conducting these outreach groups.
And how much would an economic study cost? I know I heard about 40 to 50 minimum for the survey. And was that including an independent study, or is this is separate? So what would be the cost for an independent study?
You'd probably be looking
Estimate.
at a minimum additional $40,000 to $50,000, probably.
I think it depends quite a bit on the scope of work that would be issued and requested for proposals.
Okay. So for now, I have one last question. What is the difference between the UCLA labor report that we know of and the UC Berkeley one? And which one did we use before? Because reading through prior staff reports, it seemed like the Berkeley report was the one that was used previously. It was referenced in prior staff reports.
So the city of LA worked with the UC Berkeley. In the 2016 staff report that came before the council, we partnered with UCLA Labor Center to look at West Hollywood specific data from the EDD. So they didn't necessarily provide a full report on the impacts of increasing the minimum wage in West Hollywood, but rather what our wages were at that time and any potential impacts with raising the wage, but it was very minimal.
So they're basically kind of two different reports then. That's what I'm hearing, because they're looking at different topics.
So we didn't commission a report from either institute. We just had UCLA look at our data and provide analysis similar to what was in the staff report tonight. The city of LA worked with UC Berkeley directly, and that's the report that's mentioned in tonight's staff report and also in past staff reports. So the city of West Hollywood hasn't worked with UC Berkeley, but those are options that the city could look at.
So we could commission our own report.
Correct.
I see. Okay. Thank you. Those are my questions for now.
Thank you, Councilmember Erickson.
Thank you so much. I believe Councilmember Shine asked several of my report-based questions, so we're good at in her follow-up. So my first question is, what is the average rent for a one-bedroom apartment in West Hollywood?
I believe it's approximately $1,800 to $1,900.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to ask minimum wage questions now, and then I'm going to go to my living wage questions. So I'm just going to stick to this topic. What would be the actual minimum wage for a person that a person would need to make if they were solely living just on that to live in the city of West Hollywood? So when you think about everything, like what actually would that dollar amount be? I mean, I can do my own math, right? But in terms of what we've looked at in the past, it's much higher, I'm guessing, than what's presented in many ways, shape, or form.
I think I can tackle that one. So I think a lot of that has to do with a variable amount of things: is food, childcare, medical, housing, transportation, other type of expenditures. We referenced in the staff report the MIT calculator, which has stuff for the LA County, but does not have information for specifically West Hollywood. From that calculator, we see that an adult with no children, the living wage is what we would call it, would be $19.35 an hour.
Great. Thank you. However, and this might be more of a statement than a question, based on Councilmember Shine's discussion of and David Juni's point about the rise in poverty, $19.35 an hour isn't getting someone out of poverty. It's only keeping them in poverty based on how much they'd be making per year and all the expenses they would have, right?
Yes.
Just to clarify, that in the literature review that was included in the staff report, economists, both sort of classicist and revisionist, both agree that poverty is not a result of low wages, it's a result of chronic unemployment.
Great, thank you so much. Do we know in estimation why West Hollywood, and I'm guessing when we do our new community study, with the increase of poverty levels, I mean, I'm sure COVID will only look at that in a different way, but poverty levels are increasing, and have our social services staff or other people looked at the drastic increase of poverty that I'm guessing we're going to see in the next report?
So just for a little context, after the 2019 community study was presented to council prior to the release of the current social services RFP contract cycle, which we're entering the third year. Contracts will come to you next month. So in response to that increase in poverty level, and within that, I didn't go into granular detail, but we actually saw a slight reduction in families with children living under the poverty level. So that was some good news. And then we see that the sectors of the population that have the highest rate of poverty, live in the highest rate of poverty, are our older adults, 55 and older, which kind of makes sense since many of them are living on fixed incomes, and Social Security, SSI certainly does not keep up with cost of living. So anyway, in response, when we did that report, Councilmember Erickson, the poverty initiative was presented, and how we responded with social services contracts and transit services was that we created the Aging in Place Rental Assistance Program. We brought that online with the Alliance for Housing and Healing. As you all know very well, we now have that plus the COVID-19 version of the Aging in Place Rental Assistance Program. We expanded the rental assistance program for NCJW, and that included other opportunities for some financial assistance for folks who qualified for rental assistance, and then also participated in some kind of budgeting workshops, courses, looking at their own, households and how they can, improve their situation. They receive financial assistance for participating. We increased the DFA, which is the direct financial assistance, which is also distributed by the Alliance for Housing and Healing. We brought on, as you know, we fully subsidized the Metro Senior and Disabled Bus Pass program. So all bus passes have been free since 2019. So anyway, we began to address that. I know that Corey Plank can speak to, we're looking at the Universal Basic Income programs that will be coming to staff. So anyway, we began to address it through social services. You will also see more recommendations when we bring the RFP to you next year. So that gives a little context.
Thanks. This is more for the public. How much should someone spend? What's the percentage of that someone should spend of their monthly income on rent at maximum?
So that's gone up. I mean, years ago it was a third of your income, and now it's acceptable to pay at least 50% of your income, monthly income towards rent.
Could someone theoretically, on the minimum wage being offered right now, spend be at those levels of spending a majority of their income on just rent alone in West Hollywood, based on the average number that John gave?
Absolutely.
Absolutely, great. So that doesn't leave them much time to pay for food or student loans or anything else. That's not a question, I guess. My last question is, I know, and regarding the development agreements, I was really interested about regarding the living wage. Sorry, moving into that. What does like a tiered system look like, or a case-by-case basis look like, and how staff evaluates those types of agreements, for me to better understand that?
I can try and start on that one. You know, every project that comes to the city requesting a DA is usually a larger project, and they come with a proposal of certain things that they want to do, and perhaps a package of public benefits that they want to provide in exchange for the vesting. So I think it depends on what's being proposed. What's it being built to do? What are the uses? What extras are they asking for? Everything has its own negotiation, and so it really depends on what they're coming to the city asking for and what public benefits they're offering to see where this could play into that discussion and those.
Those are all my questions at this time.
Councilmember D'Amico.
Mayor, before you go, and since we're John, Councilmember Erickson asked some questions, and David, I assume, is still around. I wanted to follow up on his point about older people transitioning to below the poverty level, and really talk just for a moment about older gay men with HIV who are on disability. And here's something that is, as you did, John, sort of is more about informing the public than asking a question, but I think there's a question in here too, that there's a large cohort of gay men in the city who have been living on disability. And as you age into a retirement age, your disability goes away and you begin to then receive Social Security from your wages, which for many gay men of a certain age, they may have stopped working at 30 or 40, and their Social Security benefit might be now $1,600 a month instead of $2,600 on retirement. And so it is an interesting thing that David said, that, unless I misheard you, that many of the people who are older are falling below the poverty line, and this may account for some of that. I know I've heard myself of the complexities of that particular detail of our federal government subsidy for people who are on disability who then transition to life on Social Security from their work days. So that's super complicated. And I remember that Councilmember Heilman, when 2 years ago, 3 years ago, sort of when he was mayor last, poverty, and specifically of older people and people with families, as were the two priorities. And it sounds like we had a good amount of success, or some success, in raising people with families out of poverty, which would be, as Tara said, more about wages than employment. But for older people, as they are transitioning out of the workforce, then it becomes less about wages. You can raise the minimum wage to $100 an hour. If you're not working, you're still living on your fixed income from your Social Security. So I think that, these are probably discussions for a human services survey results further on, but I think it's worth mentioning that there are so many complexities to this wage question, and especially as people age out of the workforce.
Okay, I have just a few questions. First, Janet, on one of your initial slides, you had said, and I was trying to catch it, but I was writing while you were talking. I think you said there was a low income tier, and the number that you said was 80,000, but the number on the slide was $96,000. And so I'm just trying to make sure I understood the point you were trying to make from that piece of information.
Apologies, and that may have been a typo on the slide, but the median income of a family in LA County is 80,000.
Okay. Mayor Pro Tem, you had said that in Pasadena that they've exempted certain sectors from adhering to the minimum wage. Did I hear that right?
What I was that they had an exemption from the city's minimum wage standard, and that had to do with tipped employees. But my question was, can we exempt a sector? If there are sectors that can be where this minimum wage is raised, where it applies to only certain sectors, can the opposite be true? That was a question.
I
But
see.
the comment about Pasadena is that they did put in their minimum wage ordinance that there is an exemption having to do with total earnings with tipped employees. And that has not been challenged as far as I know.
Okay. Thank you. I just want to make sure I caught that right. Do we have an idea of the percentage of people living in West Hollywood who have hourly wage jobs?
The data that we collected from Cali DD did not indicate whether or not the salary information was based on a year-long salary or an hourly salary. So we would need additional data sets to provide that information.
And do we have an idea of the percentage of jobs that are available in West Hollywood that are hourly versus salaried?
The current unemployment rate in West Hollywood is 11%, but I'm not sure whether or not those jobs, the difference of which are hourly or salaried.
Okay, but the jobs being offered, we don't know whether the majority of jobs being offered in the city are minimum wage or hourly jobs versus a salaried position.
The data sets that we have currently access to could provide, we could sort of draw that information out based on sort of what we know of the different sectors. So we know that our restaurants, hotels, hospitality industry are largely hourly based employees. And that does make up a large portion of our economic sectors. But that would be, in order to back that up with some data, that would be a little stretch for what the information we have access to right now.
Got it. Okay. Why would we have two different wage rates? Why would we have a minimum wage and a living wage?
So the living wage was adopted specifically for those employers or contractors doing work with the city, separate from the minimum wage. So the living wage currently only applies to city contractors. It's not all business sectors.
Understood. So it was because the city wanted to have a wage rate for contract employees that was different than the minimum wage.
Correct.
Okay. I know that you had meetings with both worker groups as well as employers. And one topic that, or one point that came up the last time we had a conversation about wages, and I know has been coming up recently, is that this is not the right time. And so I wondered if in those conversations, if either group indicated when would be the right time, or if there were a set of conditions that would make the right time for this kind of a discussion.
So during our business workforce roundtable, a lot of the businesses said that, as you said, Mayor, that it's not the right time and that we're currently in a pandemic. And from the businesses, just generally speaking, there isn't necessarily a right time because I don't think anyone knows when the pandemic is going to end. Even though, there are a lot of capacity restrictions, I think with this new Delta variant, we're seeing a little bit of change in consumer trends, especially when it comes to some of these establishments. But as far as those business outreach meetings, we did not hear a specific date on when they would like us to revisit something like this.
Okay, that might be helpful for us to hear in some of our comments tonight. Do we have an idea of how many projects in the city use development agreements now? Is that a common tool that we're using at this point?
I don't know if, I don't mean to put John Kehoe on the spot if he has that information. They haven't been used as frequently as they were in years past. I haven't seen one other than the billboards. I don't remember the city processing a development agreement for a development project in quite a few years. But someone from the planning department might have more recent information, or maybe they can look and get back to you.
And I think that's correct. In the more recent years, we have processed larger projects as specific plans. I don't think there has been a development agreement that has been approved in a number of years, and the ones that did move forward recently, Sunset Millennium, Sunset Time, were development agreements that were adopted many decades earlier. They say John Kehoe is here.
Good evening, everyone. I would say that we have less than 20 development agreements that are actual projects. I don't have the exact number, but it's not very many. So probably less than 20.
And these are the billboard projects, or?
No, these are projects like Sunset Millennium. They're actual projects with buildings with them. So it's not very many.
So existing developments that have
right
existing development.
And they do expire over a period of time. For instance, the Pacific Design Center had a development agreement and it was for 15 years. And so of course, by now that one's expired. So just kind of depends.
Sure. Another example that I had a question about, I know that in the development agreement for the addition development, we included living wage language as part of that development agreement for the jobs that were on site. And I'm wondering how that was enforced and how and what data we have about the impact of that condition in the development agreement on that project.
So I don't know if we've gone back and taken a look at that since the hotel's been open. So that's something we would have to go take a look at.
Okay. And my last question is, I think I heard Janet say that many of the workers who participated, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, were being paid a higher rate than the current minimum wage in West Hollywood. Is that right?
Yes, of the workers that attended, we did a live survey or a poll during the Zoom and asked for people to provide their current wages, and also during their comments in the meeting, they did share what their wages were for those in the hotel industry, ranging from $16.50 to almost $19 an hour.
Okay, so businesses are already largely paying a higher wage per hour than what our current minimum wage is.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Very good. Councilmember Erickson.
Thank you very much, Mayor. You said you were sparking each other's ideas, just like I apparently did for Councilmember D'Amico with his question. And forgive me, a lot has happened since 2016, but Paulo or Tara or Janet, what was the response of the business community back in 2016 for when I believe they said it's not the right time? But what other responses did they say back then when was the right time back in 2016 when there wasn't a global pandemic or anything like that? Could you help explain a little bit more of the criticism and the push and feedback about that for?
I will share. Paulo and Tara were with us back in 2016, so I'll try to recollect accurately what was discussed. The comments from the business community at the time, obviously we weren't in a pandemic, but it was that a majority of the businesses were already paying above the minimum wage at that time. And the data from UCLA showed that on average, we were $2 to $2.50 more than the minimum wage at the time, which was $10. So that was their point at the time. And the same concerns as we've heard in recent months of increased cost to payroll, goods, et cetera.
If businesses are already paying more than the minimum wage, establishing a minimum wage standard or a living wage standard that would be at a certain base level wouldn't impact those individuals that are already going above and beyond, correct?
That's correct. If businesses are in fact already paying above the minimum wage, and there were a local minimum wage implemented, it would be minimal.
Thank you. That's it. I think I'm done now, Mayor.
Councilmember Shine.
Thank you. I just want to expand on the discussion from Councilmember D'Amico regarding disability income. I think it's really important. It's my understanding that disability income, as well as Social Security income, as Councilmember D'Amico correctly pointed out, is based on how much wages you've made. So in essence, when your wages are lower, when you retire, your Social Security payment is going to be lower. Disability is also based on your wages, and so is unemployment income. Do we know what percentage of unemployment income, so let's say the amount of unemployment income that they're basing the, let's say you made $1,000, you make $1,000, I'm just making these numbers, $1,000 a month, you become unemployed, what percentage of that would you be able to recoup when you get unemployment? They don't give you, they basically don't make you whole when you get unemployment. It's a percentage, right? You know how much of that percentage you get in unemployment?
I can try to jump in here. We don't have that information for our West Hollywood specific employees that have recently become on unemployment. We could quickly Google that and potentially find a general answer for nationwide rates of unemployment pay. I will note that like during the pandemic unemployment assistance that Cal EDD is still providing, that it does continue to make the folks that are currently on unemployment due to the pandemic whole.
And Councilmember Shine, on average, unemployment benefits are 2/3 of one's earnings, and they're not taxed. So at the end of the year, that is taxable income.
Yes, so you can actually choose to get the tax taken out of your unemployment, or you can wait and have it taken out later. I believe it's, thank you, that was my question. Janet, sorry if I wasn't clear, Tara. I'm actually, so in essence, I guess what I'm getting at, and I think with disability income is 60 to 70%. Again, those are also based on your base level wages. And also they actually at some point max out, so they don't really make you whole if you make a certain amount or above, even with some of the pandemic pay for some people. So those are all the questions I have.
Okay. Mayor Pro Tem Meister.
Thank you. On the question you had for me, I misspoke. Pasadena proposed the exemption, but they may not have used it when they actually passed their minimum wage. So I just wanted to, but I don't know that it was legal or not. And that was my question for our city attorney to see if that's possible.
Got it.
Thank you.
And I don't know if everybody saw, but I did ask for the reports on the minimum wage discussions from 2014, the original report from Council Members Heilman and Land, which gave that direction, as well as the staff updates and research. All of that was posted online with this item. So if anybody wanted to look back at that research or the discussion or how that conversation initiated, all of that is available for people to access as well. So if there are no further questions from council, I'm happy to turn to public comment. And so I will turn it over to our city clerk.
Thank you, Mayor. We have several speakers this evening, and we will be providing translation for certain individuals. Our translator this evening is Sarah. So Sarah, when I need translation done, I will indicate that after I call the person, and each individual will have 2 minutes to provide public comment on this item. The first person to speak this evening is Joe Guadarrama. Joe, please press *6 and you will have 2 minutes to speak under public comment.
Hi, this is Joe Guadarrama, longtime resident of the city of West Hollywood. I believe I'm going on 22 years now. I'm here to speak in favor of raising the minimum wage in the city. I spoke in 2016, I believe, when the council considered this last time, and it narrowly didn't pass. And I think now is time to fix a historical wrong. Our city is a leader in many, many things and should not be behind in the way it pays how do I put this? The people who earn the least among us, who should have as much dignity as everyone else in our city. So I urge the council to not take too long to look at this issue and come up with a solution that mirrors what the city of Santa Monica did. And so we can be on par with them as we are in many, many other respects. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Our next speaker is Mark Edwards. Mark, please press *6 and you will have 2 minutes to provide public comment.
Good evening, Mayor Horvath, council members, staff, fellow WeHoans, and welcome guests. I am Mark R. Edwards, president of the Miracle Mile Democratic Club and a resident of West Hollywood. We supported this initiative when Mayor Horvath and former councilman John Heilman brought it forward in 2016. We are so joyful that Councilmember Shine and Erickson are bringing it forward again, especially when such a bright light has been shown on the profound inequality experienced by frontline workers. We know what to do: draft the minimum wage ordinance and a hotel worker minimum wage ordinance. The city of West Hollywood historically counted on the hotel tax, which was 37% of the projected tax revenue in 2019 and 20, then add sales tax revenue, and it's a significant amount of funding to the coffers, and gave us a significant reserve fund. We as residents have all benefited, and it's only fair to extend the public benefits to the workers in our city. Therefore, draft a minimum wage ordinance and a hotel worker minimum wage ordinance. Lastly, this is also personal. I worked at Nate & Al's, which was unionized by here, Local 11. It gave me a livable wage and health care, which allowed me to pay rent, eat, and finish college at Cal State Northridge. A living wage creates opportunities for social mobility. It's time to draft a minimum wage ordinance and a hotel worker minimum wage ordinance. You don't need that much time to study what is the right thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Before I move to our next speaker, I just want to share with those individuals in the meeting to please remain on mute until I call your name. Everyone, we have your name on a list, so When it's time for you to speak, I will call you. So please remain on mute. Our next speaker is Yeshi Lema. Yeshi, please press *6 and you will have 2 minutes to provide public comment.
Hello, my name is Yeshi Lema, and I am speaking on behalf of the Los Angeles Alliance for a New Economy, or LANE. We are an economic policy organization that's been advocating for improvements for workers for over 25 years now. LANE has been a leading member of the coalitions that fought to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour in Los Angeles County, the city of Los Angeles, Santa Monica, Pasadena, and Long Beach. For over 2 decades, alongside our union partners, we have been lifting up the voices of the working poor in Los Angeles County, who have built the economic engine of our region. We urge you to follow suit tonight and direct staff to draft minimum wage and hotel worker minimum wage ordinances that mirror those of Santa Monica. We want to applaud Mayor Horvath and former council member John Heilman for leading the effort to follow suit back in 2016, and we're encouraged by the council members bringing this effort back, especially as low-wage service workers emerge as the new frontline workers while we continue to battle this pandemic. Our region is home to the country's largest population of the working poor, and West Hollywood is no different, with one of the largest concentrations of hospitality in the region. Sadly, West Hollywood's minimum wage is the lowest compared to its neighbors, so the most skilled workers have no incentive to work within the city. There's no labor shortage, but rather a shortage of good jobs. In Santa Monica, we work tirelessly and with great attention to detail to come up with wage proposals for all workers, as well as hotel workers, so that cities with similar economies like West Hollywood could easily follow suit. We commend employers who are already paying their workers higher wages, but this should be the rule and not the exception. Please take action tonight. The pandemic has made it abundantly clear that service workers deserve to be compensated for their hard work, and they cannot wait any longer. Thank you.
Thank you, Yeshi. Our next speaker is Rob Natoff. Rob, please press *6 and you will have 2 minutes to provide public comment.
Thank you so much. And good evening, Mayor Horvath and members of the council. My name is Rob Notoff. I'm the policy director with the Los Angeles County Federation of Labor, where we proudly represent over 800,000 hardworking women and men across all industries throughout LA County. And I'm calling in tonight to urge the council to move forward with drafting an updated minimum wage and living wage ordinance that better addresses the economic hardships faced by West Hollywood's working families. Not only do West Hollywood service workers deserve a raise after manning the front lines of this deadly pandemic, some of whom forfeited their very lives while earning wages that don't even cover the basic cost of housing, it also makes economic sense to boost the wage. We've already seen numerous studies that show increasing the minimum wage results in more economic output and is good for the overall economy. And when low-wage workers receive wages, they pump that money right back into the local economy as they spend it on basic needs and services. That circulates more money back into our local economy, increases our local tax revenue, and brings more economic certainty to West Hollywood. And further, it'll make West Hollywood more competitive in retaining workers, of which there's a well-documented shortage. It's not a coincidence that the lowest paying industries are struggling to staff up as we emerge from this pandemic. As the previous speaker said, it's not a labor shortage, it's a shortage of good jobs. Conversely, when workers are paid fairly and treated with dignity, they stay longer and remain loyal to their employer. As you all know, the LA Fed has been engaged in numerous minimum wage and living wage efforts throughout the county. And without fail, we've encountered naysayers who say these efforts will harm the local economy, only to be proven wrong once the policies are actually enacted. So let's not give in to the naysayers tonight, and let's proceed with doing what's right for West Hollywood's working families. The right time is right now. That's why we urge you to direct staff to draft a minimum wage ordinance and hotel worker minimum wage ordinance mirroring Santa Monica's, and an updated living wage ordinance that addresses the needs of West Hollywood's working families. It's good for our economy, it's good for business, and our workers certainly deserve it after this pandemic. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rob. The next several speakers require translation. So if our interpreter, Sarah, could please unmute herself. I will call our first speaker, Norma Hernandez. Please press *6 and you will have 2 minutes to provide public comment.
Norma Hernández, por favor, si puede presionar *6 y puede empezar su comentario.
Buenas noches. ¿Sí me escucha?
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Sí.
Sí.
Mi nombre es Norma Hernández.
My name is Norma Hernández.
Trabajé en el Mondrian Hotel
And
como
I worked at the
recamarera
Morgan
por
Hotel
por 13 años.
as a waitress
En
for
el
13
transcurso,
years.
en el transcurso del tiempo que llegué a trabajar ahí, gané 17.81, pero llevo
During the
mucho
time
tiempo
period I was
ganando,
there, I earned 1781.
llevo mucho tiempo ganando muy poco. Cuando nos tocaba un aumento, la compañía tomaba en consideración. Si
For the
nosotros
very long
teníamos
time, I've only
disciplina,
been earning a very low wage.
si nosotros teníamos disciplinas, entonces no nos tocaba aumento.
And when there was time for an increase of pay, if you ever had been disciplined, we would not get any increase in our pay.
A mí me pasó en algunas veces. Tener un sueldo digno no solo me ayudará a mí, también ayudará a mis compañeros que trabajamos en el área de West Hollywood.
And this happened to me on several occasions. And I know to have a dignified income will not only benefit myself, but also my coworkers.
Yo sé que con este sueldo que tenemos, uno no puede vivir dentro de la ciudad. Se nos es difícil.
And I'm aware that with the wages that we are receiving at the moment, it is not possible to live in the city. It's just too difficult.
A una ciudad que le hemos dado todo. Les pido que tomen en consideración esta propuesta y apoyen el sueldo digno.
And
Por favor,
I do request, please, to help in this matter, to have a dignified wage for that.
Por
we
favor,
have worked
no.
very hard for this city.
Por favor, estudien esto más. No lo estudien más. No podemos esperar. Tomen una medida esta noche.
So we urge you, please, to study in this matter and to take a decision tonight.
Para aprobar una política de salario mínimo para los hoteles, que sea tan sólida como la que tienen en Santa Mónica. Dios les bendiga y muchas gracias.
And we do ask, please, that you take this proposal, and we urge you, please, to help in the hotel industry, and that you vote tonight, and may God bless you.
Thank you, Norma. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Councilmember Erickson.
I don't know if it's just me, but it's really hard for, I can't hear Norma's comment, but then the translator's comment at the same time. I don't know if all public speakers know that they're going to be simultaneously translated, and so they should pause. But if they could say what they need to say and then it's translated, it'd be a lot easier on my end. But I guess I'll defer to however you set it up prior.
Yeah, Sarah, if you could allow the individuals to provide their comment and then provide a summary as best you can, I think that would be helpful. Our next speaker is Luis Garcia. Luis, please press *6 and you will have, we'll give you a little more time since you will require translation. So we'll provide about 2.5 minutes.
Luis, le vamos a dar 2 minutos y medio ya que va a necesitar usted traducción y puede presionar *6.
Okay, Luis is not unmuting, so I will move on to Eno Get On. Eno, please press *6 and you will have roughly 2.5 minutes to provide public comment and translation.
No tenemos a Luis, que no ha abierto su micrófono, así que vamos a pasar con Eno. Si puede decirnos, por favor, tiene 2 minutos y medio si presiona *6.
So Eno had unmuted himself and then remuted. So let me. Eno, go ahead, press *6.
Eno, por favor, si puede presionar *6.
Buenas noches. ¿Me escuchan?
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Hello.
Sí, we can hear you.
Okay. Buenas noches, mi nombre es Enoe Girón. Trabajo en el Hotel Mondrian como recamarera por 31 años. Durante todo este tiempo que he trabajado ahí solo he... Hello. Hello. ¿Me escuchan?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello.
Sí.
¿Sí?
Sí, lo escuchamos.
Ok, durante todo este tiempo que he trabajado ahí, solo he llegado a alcanzar el sueldo de 17.63. Estoy ganando menos que mis compañeros que tienen mucho menos tiempo trabajando en esto. Ha pasado por ello ellos basan el aumento cada año si pasamos la revisión. Nos dan el 3% y por muchos años a mí me han aumentado el 1%. Y para la pandemia he tenido que usar el 401k para mantener a mi familia y a mí. Les quiero pedir que voten sí por un salario digno para mí y mis compañeros. En este momento necesitamos recuperarnos económicamente. Los trabajadores de Los Ángeles y Santa Mónica ganan mejores salarios que nosotros y no es justo. Gracias.
Well,
Hello.
I have worked in this hotel for about 31 years now, and as a maid, I have earned $17.63, less than some coworkers that have started after me. We asked if we can pass this and vote yes. I have only been increased a 1%, and during this pandemic, I have been needing to use my 401k to maintain my family. So please vote yes to a dignified wage, and that way we can recover. We want to mirror what Santa Monica has done, and we ask for your help.
Thank you, Sarah. The next speaker requires translation as well. Aurelia Gonzalez, please press *6, and you will have roughly 2.5 minutes to provide public comment.
Rogelia también desea, por favor, hablar por 2 minutos y medio. Si por favor puede presionar *6 y empezar su comentario.
Aurelia. Aurelia. She's unmuted, but not speaking. So let me move to the next person. Yanette Cruz, please press *6, and you will have 2 minutes to provide public comment.
René Cruz, si puede presionar *6 y entonces puede dar su comentario público.
¿Me escuchan?
Sí.
¿Me escuchan?
Can you hear me?
Sí, escucho. Mi nombre es Janet Cruz. He trabajado por 19 años en el Standard Hotel. Casi la mitad de los años que he estado en este país y terminé ganando con la pandemia $16.16. Para mí todo el tiempo fue bastante difícil poder sobrevivir y me tuve que apoyar en una de mis hijas que es la que estaba trabajando y estudiando y me ayudaba para poder completar todos mis gastos, lo cual se me hace bastante injusto porque yo sería la que tendría que llevar todo lo económico a mi casa. Sé que tanto la comida, la renta, todo ha subido, y hoy que se terminó la pandemia, pues se ha hecho bien difícil también poder recuperar los empleos, cosa que a mí ya no me tocaría porque pues el hotel cerró definitivamente las puertas. Pero si hoy que ando en busca de empleo, ustedes ayudan a incrementar el sueldo mínimo, creo que sería algo muy bueno para nosotros que nos hemos quedado sin empleo. Eso es todo. Gracias.
Yes, my name is Jeanette Cruz. I've worked 19 years in the Standard Hotel. Half of this years that I've been in this country. During this time of pandemic, I have earned $16.16. It has been very difficult to survive. I now have received the support of one of my daughters and moving in with her. I find this very unjust since I should be the main one supporting. Food, rent has gone up, and now during pandemic, the hotel doors have closed. So increasing the minimum wage would be very helpful for those that have lost jobs as myself. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. The next speaker will require translation as well. Luis Garcia, please press *6, and you will have roughly 2.5 minutes to provide public comment. Go ahead, Luis.
Luis García, si desea presionar *6 y empezar su comentario por 2 minutos y medio.
Go ahead, Luis.
Luis.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Luis García. Trabajé como houseman por 11 años en el Hotel Montreal. Ganaba $17.50 y tenía 2 trabajos porque uno no era lo suficiente para sostener mis hijos. Soy padre soltero y es muy difícil que el sueldo que pueda cumplir con todas sus necesidades y impactó, y tendría un salario digno en nuestra vida. Podría darme una oportunidad de dedicarles más tiempo a ellos, ya que no tendría que tener 2 trabajos. Por favor, actúen esta noche para aprobar una política y salario mínimo para todos los trabajadores de los hoteles de West Hollywood. Muchas gracias. Eso es todo.
My name is Luis Garcia. I have worked as a houseman in the Montreal Hotel. I earn $17.56. I have 2 jobs, and this is due to one not being enough to support my children. I am a single dad, and I ask that we can earn a dignified wage. This would give me the opportunity to spend more time with my children. Please take action today and increase the minimum wage of the hotels in West Hollywood. That would be all.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Angel Manrique. Angel, please press *6, and you will have 2.5 minutes to provide public comment and translation.
Ángel, si desea presionar *6 para que pueda empezar su comentario al público, va a tener 2 minutos y medio.
Okay, Angel isn't unmuting. The next speaker does not require translation. Sergio Sorsa, please press *6, and you will have 2 minutes to provide public comment.
Hello, can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, good evening. I just want to start off by saying that, I want to give thanks to SEPI for pointing out the outreach efforts here and some of the issues with actually getting workers. I think we need to take into strong consideration here that when we do these outreach processes on minimum wage increases, it's important for the council to consider that employees can never speak freely in front of their employers. Please consider for a second just how difficult it is to do surveys among not only workers, but oftentimes immigrant workers who may not speak the English language. I do want to know that a hotel manager did speak at one of the feedback sessions last Monday that was supposed to be for workers. The results from that meeting were totally corrupted by the presence of this manager, as he made it an unsafe space for workers. I think we all know what the answer would be if you asked the average bar back making $14 an hour in West Hollywood whether they would appreciate a minimum wage increase. When I was a hotel worker and the LA City raised the minimum wage, I was actually working as a barista at the time, and it incentivized me to move over and apply to a hotel that was paying more than $2 the wage that I was currently making for the same job. Please do the right thing and take action tonight. Working people cannot wait as their savings have been completely drained from COVID. Please direct staff to come back with Santa Monica minimum wage and hotel worker minimum wage ordinances. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Sergio. Our next speaker is Nick Remedio. Nick, please press *6 and you will have 2 minutes to provide public comment.
Good evening, Council. Thank you for your time this evening to city staff in preparing the analysis presented to all of us. I would just like to suggest that I agree with the calls for a comprehensive survey, a detailed wage survey of all employers should be taken in the city to ascertain exactly what they're paying to all of their workers. But in addition to that, we should look at other items, studying the end of the commercial rent moratorium and the projected payback schedule and how that will affect employers as they're going to be spending the next 12, 24, 36 months paying back that rent, and that impact has to be considered. Also understanding a loss of income during the pandemic and the resulting impact on reinvesting in their businesses to keep their equipment, fixtures updated and fresh, whether that's in renovations or just in normal day-to-day maintenance to maintain the businesses as first-class destinations of which West Hollywood has become known. Also understand the impact of inflation on goods and services that is widely reported right now. And I think further at determining the impact of a wage increase and the increase in prices that would occur for goods and services that would be charged to consumers is important to make sure that West Hollywood doesn't price itself out for its own residents to enjoy the restaurants, bars, and shops that they're proud to call establishments within their home. And lastly, I'd call on City Attorney Lauren Langer to study the impact of a tip credit, whereas I've done research where so long as the minimum wage is in the state is not lower, that is, if West Hollywood maintained the state minimum wage for tipped employees, then an exemption could take place above that minimum state wage for tipped employees. I think it's very important to make that determination because one of the great concerns is not about paying a minimum wage to workers, but it's for tipped employees who are making well above the minimum wage, servers and bartenders, et cetera, that this has to be studied. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick. Our next speaker is Genevieve Morrill. Genevieve, please press *6 and you will have 2 minutes to provide public comment.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Good evening, Mayor and City Council members and members of the community. Genevieve Morrill, President and CEO for the West Hollywood Chamber of Commerce. It's so unfortunate that we have to create a divisive type of format between workers against businesses. And our West Hollywood businesses choose to open in this city because it's progressive and because most share the city's core values, and they care deeply about social justice, equality, and compassionate to lifting up the marginalized business. This is really about a trade-off. Businesses, just by nature of being a business, are already at a disadvantage. They're called greedy, only focused on the bottom line, they're wage thieves, and generally evil capitalists. I've never seen this within the small business community in West Hollywood, which is comprised of 80% of small independent businesses. But I have witnessed the ugliness of this perception. It's perpetuated by many, even most recently in the hotel ordinance conversations, about a business community that is still trying to survive a devastating pandemic economic tragedy. I'm glad we're here tonight so that we can understand what's at stake for both sides of this issue and hopefully be partners in finding a way to support the city's core values and the community at large. Labor frames this conversation that opposition to the wage must be evil businesses that want to deny workers a wage that allows them to adequately provide for their families, and yet give no consideration that these West Hollywood businesses care deeply about their employees and also just keep trying to keep their doors open so they can feed their families, theirs included. Nameless faceless businesses to them, but to us, they are our West Hollywood, our community members. They aren't outsiders. They are part of who we are and what makes us special. These speakers, none of them work in West Hollywood. It is so interesting that instead of seeing that West Hollywood cares deeply about maintaining its unique boutique business environment, they find it shocking that a city that prides itself on being most progressive wouldn't have the highest in the minimum wage. This is a trade-off, people. Does the progressive mean understanding, or does it mean that we only have land that's fit for corporate chains to hire these workers to pay this wage? You are wiping out the mama, papa businesses in this community, in the most amazing city in the world. We're welcome to Santa Monica. That's what we're looking at.
Thank you, Genevieve. Our next speaker is Sion Roy. Sion, please press *6 and you will have 2 minutes to provide public comment. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Shai Roy. I'm a physician, former Santa Monica Democratic Club president, former president of the LA County Medical Association, and current candidate for Assembly in AD 50. In 2016, I helped advise the Santa Monica City Council when they passed their minimum wage and hotel worker minimum wage laws. I want to recognize Mayor Horvath and former Councilman Heilman for their leadership on the issue at that time, as well as here in West Hollywood, and thank Council members Shine and Erickson for putting this forward now. In addition to a just wage, this pandemic has highlighted the importance of paid sick leave. Not only does it protect the workers, but it protects the general public, as workers will not be forced to come in while symptomatic and potentially spread dangerous diseases like COVID-19 to fellow employees or patrons. The sick day provisions proposed are among the strongest in the country, and as a physician, I strongly advise you to implement them here along with the other provisions of the ordinance. West Hollywood has always led on issues of equity, and this should be no different. Please take action tonight. Do not study any further. This legislation is timely given all that is going on with the pandemic. We passed similar legislation in Santa Monica in 2016 with a positive, just effect. Santa Monica's law is 5 years old, and the cost of living certainly exceeds the wage scales approved then, but I'm very supportive of the council's courageous effort to potentially match that, and I have no doubt the effect will be similar here in West Hollywood as it was in Santa Monica. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean, and apologies for butchering your name. Our next speaker is Rick Zuber. Rick, please press *6 and you will have 2 minutes to provide public comment.
Good evening. My name is Rick Chavez-Zuber, and I'm the Executive Director of Equality California, the nation's largest statewide LGBTQ+ civil rights organization. And I'm here tonight to respectfully urge the council to direct your staff to draft a minimum wage ordinance and a hotel worker minimum wage ordinance, and to do that tonight, similar to Santa Monica's, which are among the strongest in the country. Hospitality workers are the backbone of West Hollywood's economy and deserve to earn fair and livable wages. I had the privilege and the honor to meet with hotel workers in West Hollywood in the last week, and their stories were heartbreaking in terms of their inability to support their families, especially given the circumstances they've experienced through the COVID-19 pandemic. And it really is not, we don't need to study this more. It's not that complicated. Any study that can happen while your staff is drafting the ordinance and through the analysis there. As you know, LGBTQ plus people are overrepresented in the hospitality industry, especially in the city of West Hollywood. And many of these low-wage service workers are also immigrants and people of color. A minimum wage increase for hospitality industry workers would provide increased financial stability and greater economic empowerment for the city's diverse LGBTQ plus community. And that's why Equality California has strongly supported minimum wage increases, because we believe that working families should have the opportunity for a better life. Increasing the minimum wage is one important tool that can mitigate cycles of poverty. We really applaud Mayor Horvath and former Council Member Heilman and Council Member Shine and Erickson for leading this fight to raise the minimum wage. And we are confident that this council will do the right thing. With more money in their pockets, LGBTQ plus and all workers can afford to invest back in our communities, lifting everyone up. This is an important opportunity for you to send a powerful message of support for and solidarity with the hardworking hospitality employees and their families in West Hollywood and beyond, at a time when so many are struggling to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic and continue to face serious health risks at work every day. So we respectfully urge you to take action tonight to pass this minimum wage policy and a hotel minimum wage policy, and to direct your staff to prepare that ordinance this evening. Thank you very much for your leadership on this important issue, and I appreciate the opportunity to address the council. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rick. Our next speaker is Danielle Wilson. Danielle, please press *6 and you will have 2 minutes to provide public comment. Danielle, please press *6.
Hi, good evening. My name is Danielle Wilson, and I'm speaking on behalf of Unite Here Local 11 and as a resident of the city of West Hollywood. We're so grateful for the council for revisiting this important topic as we see working families fall deeper and deeper into poverty cycles amid the pandemic. I'm going to offer my perspective tonight as a resident of West Hollywood who patronizes our local businesses on a weekly and oftentimes daily basis. I don't think I'm alone when I say that one of the reasons I live here is because I can walk to our amazing local businesses. And I would gladly pay $1 or $2 more for a meal at Traktier or Love Organic Cafe if it meant $1 more in the pocket of a server, bartender, or dishwasher who makes up the backbone of our local economy. And we are not going to punish our bartenders and go-go dancers who earn tips with a tip credit that has been proven to be illegal over and over again. And I spend half of my income renting a 1-bedroom rent-controlled apartment in our city that has got to be one of the least glamorous buildings in West Hollywood. Our city is exceptional in many ways, but unfortunately, it is exceptionally behind in terms of structural economic issues. To Councilman Erickson's earlier questions, the National Low Income Housing Coalition released a report in July that determined that a renter would need to earn an hourly wage of $51.15 in my zip code, 90046, in order to afford a 2-bedroom apartment. I remember talking to a server at Fiesta Cantina a couple years ago who told me that he made $13.25 an hour and commuted to West Hollywood from Northridge. This is the status quo for food service workers in our city, even workers that you've heard from tonight who've dedicated decades of their lives to our industry. If we are serious about our housing goals and affirmatively furthering fair housing, we need to take steps to ensure that workers in our community who produce the revenue that we all benefit from, including me, also have a chance to even live here. Unfortunately, we are not leading on this topic, but we have an opportunity to right a historical wrong tonight. Please take action and direct staff to come back with minimum wage laws that reflect Santa Monica. Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. Our next speaker is Sandra Fluke. Sandra, please press *6 and you will have 2 minutes to provide public comment.
Hi, this is Sandra Fluke. I'm an attorney and until recently a resident of West Hollywood. I want to thank the workers who spoke this evening and had the courage to speak in front of employers, and I hope that our council members will share the same kind of courage and show that in tonight's vote as well. During the time when I was a resident of West Hollywood, both my husband and myself operated small businesses and always worked hard to pay more than $15 an hour to anyone we employed. I remember when I spoke on this matter in 2016, and I was so disappointed and frankly surprised that such a leading progressive city was not taking that step at that time. I remember one of the pivotal arguments was that we needed to prioritize the concerns of those who were residents of West Hollywood, and I was really struck by the problematic moral calculus of that. I believe West Hollywood is a city who cares about all who live, work, and play in the city, and that we cannot be a city of those who benefit ourselves and rely on low-wage workers coming from outside. I hope the council will make a better choice this evening and direct the staff to enact a policy in line with Santa Monica's. As an employer, currently, I run a $3 million organization, and I have always struggled with making those kinds of budgets, but have never chosen the staff as the place to prioritize cost cutting. That's a choice that every employer faces, and in the case in which every employer can make the right choice and not balance this on the backs of their workers. No more study is needed. This question is clear and has been clear for years and has been enacted in so many cities. I hope West Hollywood will do so tonight.
Thank you, Sandra. Our next speaker is Mark Peterson. Mark, please press *6 and you will have 2 minutes to provide public comment. Go ahead, Mark.
Hello, my name is, yes, thank you. Hello, my name is Mark Peterson, and until recently, for reasons due to the pandemic and other personal reasons, I had to move back home to Pennsylvania, but I was a resident in West Hollywood for 14 years, and during that time, it became very difficult to afford just regular things living in West Hollywood and earning what I was earning working at a hotel as a concierge. And, you know, it may seem unusual because it looks like it's a glamorous position, but, you know, at times things were really tough. And I did things like I would recycle my cans and bottles, and I used to go to the gas station on Melrose Avenue to do the recycling because they would pay for the aluminum and the glass, but that ended, and I fortunately wasn't able to supplement my income with that. I used to shop at thrift stores, like Out of the Closet, if I wanted to get something decent, and you know, this was just to save money. I drove a used car and had very modest entertainment. And this is because the cost of living is rather high and the wages are not commensurate with that sort of thing. And for me, I love West Hollywood. If I were going to live anywhere in the LA area, it would be West Hollywood. And I think it's important for West Hollywood to step up to the plate and attract people who are, oh, I'm hearing something.
Yeah, that's the speaker timer, Mr. Peterson. So if you could wrap up your thought, thank you.
So I think it's important to attract people who are good workers who can earn a decent wage and live in the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Our next speaker is Esperanza Cernas. Esperanza, please press *6 and you will have 2 minutes to provide public comment. Esperanza? Okay, I'll go to our next speaker, Gustavo Maldonado. Please press *6 and you will have 2 minutes to provide public comment.
¿Es el tuyo, no?
Go ahead, Sergio.
Buenas noches. ¿Sí me escuchan?
Sí. ¿Quién es?
Mi nombre es Gustavo Maldonado.
Gracias.
Y trabajé como cocinero durante 19 años en el Hotel Standard, ganando $16 la hora. Debido a la pandemia, perdí mis trabajos. Tengo 5 hijos y para poder salir adelante, siempre he tenido que tener 2 trabajos. Hoy más que nunca, necesitamos el liderazgo de los concejales en West Hollywood en apoyar una ley de salario digno para los trabajadores de West Hollywood. Muchísimas gracias a todos.
Hello, my name is Gustavo. I've worked as a cook for 19 years in the Standard Hotel, earning $16 an hour. Due to the pandemic, I lost my job. I've had to have always 2 jobs to support my family. I have 5 kids. So I ask, please, for the council's leadership to pass this law so we can have a dignified wage. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. The next speaker does not require translation. Jordan David, please press *6 and you will have 2 minutes to provide public comment.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, this is Jordan David. I'm calling from occupied Tongva land, and I'm a voter in West Hollywood elections. When President Roosevelt introduced the minimum wage in 1933, he stated the intent as follows: no business which depends on existence on paying less than living wages to its workers has any right to continue in this country. By business, I mean the whole of commerce, as well as the whole of industry. By workers, I mean all workers, the white collar class, as well as the men in overalls. And by living wages, I mean more than a bare subsistence level. I mean the wages of decent living, end quote. In regards to what you're being asked to give direction on tonight, the city should not continue to have a living wage that's separate from the minimum wage. The minimum wage should be enough to thrive as it was designed. There should not be a tiered system regarding whether or not the employer provides health care. The wage ordinance should apply to all workers in West Hollywood, not just city contracts. All development agreements should be subject to the wage ordinance with no exceptions. The minimum wage should be set significantly higher than the state, as the state minimum is not enough to live in West Hollywood. Based on the average cost of a 1-bedroom apartment here, rent being 1/3 of income, and a person working 40 hours a week, they would need to be making at least $40 an hour. There should be no limits on sick leave. No one sick with COVID-19 should be forced to prepare and serve your food. And a year of outreach and study is totally unnecessary and takes the side of the Chamber of Commerce, who has proven that they are willing to go to any lengths to keep their workers in a state of wage slavery. Thank you.
Thank you, Jordan. The next speaker is Esperanza Cernas. Esperanza, please press *6, and Sarah, she will require translation, please.
Ya. Buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Esperanza Cernas y trabajé en el Hotel Standard por 4 años como recamarera y ganaba $15.50. Nosotros nunca recibimos un aumento salarial. Cuando las cosas van en aumento como la renta, el transporte, la comida y después de la pandemia, la inflación nos ha impactado más a nosotros los trabajadores que vivimos de cheque en cheque. Yo soy madre soltera y de mí depende mi familia. Por favor, actúen esta noche para aprobar una política de salario mínimo para los trabajadores de hoteles de West Hollywood, que sean tan fuertes como los de Santa Mónica. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Esperanza, por intérprete. ¿Podría repetir cuántos años trabajó en el Standard Hotel?
4 años.
Gracias. Hello, my name is Esperanza Cerdes, and I worked at the Standard Hotel for 4 years. I have earned $15.50, never have had an increase. Food and rent has been increasing, and I am a single mother. We asked and urge you to act tonight so we can have a theme as Santa Monica and a dignified wage. Thank you.
Thank you, Esperanza. The next speaker is Liliana Hernandez, and she will require translation. Liliana, go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Liliana Hernandez, and I used to work at the Sunset Tower Hotel here in West Hollywood in 2012 for 4 years as housekeeper. I used to make $11.50 an hour, and anytime we would get a raise, we'd only get up to 25 cents at most. And the only consistent increase we got was a workload increase. And Sunset Tower eventually ended up firing me and all my housekeeping co-workers in 2012. Now I work in the city of Santa Monica and make over $23 an hour, more than double the amount I was making while working in West Hollywood. With this difference in wages, I'm able to comfortably support my family and for the first time have savings for an emergency. Passing the living wage in West Hollywood will change the lives of many workers. Please take action tonight to ensure that West Hollywood has as strong of a living wage law as Santa Monica. And thank you so much to all the council members who have been supporting these workers in West Hollywood. God bless you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Liliana. Our next speaker is Albert Munoz. Albert, please press *6, and you will have 2 minutes to provide public comment. Albert, please press *6. I'm going to see if I can get him to unmute. Okay, I'll go to our next speaker, which is Esmelda Reyes. And she requires translation. Esmelda, please press *6.
Esmelda, si puede presionar estrella 6.
Buenas noches. Buenas noches.
Buenas noches.
Mi nombre es Esmelda Reyes, trabajo en el departamento de housekeeping en la ciudad de Santa Mónica por 9 años. Cuando el concilio pasó el sueldo digno, cambió mi vida. Hoy puedo ganar lo mismo en 4 días de trabajo, lo que ganaba en 5 días de trabajo. Anteriormente lo que ganaba en 4 días, ahora lo gano en 5 días de trabajo. Anteriormente, esto me da la oportunidad de estar más tiempo con la familia y descanso también mi cuerpo. El trabajo de housekeeping es un trabajo pesado. Está muy pesado. Estoy muy feliz al escuchar que la ciudad de West Hollywood se pasó la ordenanza de protección de recamareras, como la pasó en la ciudad de Santa Mónica. Con estas 2 leyes, en efecto, nosotros las recamareras podemos trabajar dignamente. Gracias a los miembros del consejo, que Dios los bendiga y muy buenas noches.
Hello, my name is Esmeralda Reyes, and I worked in the Department of Housekeeping for 9 years. And the action that was taken in Santa Monica changed my life. I now earn in 4 days what I used to earn in 5. It has changed my life because now my body can rest. And I am happy that West Hollywood is taking action on this ordinance. for the housekeeping as they have in Santa Monica. I want to thank the council members, and God bless you.
Thank you, Sarah. Our next speaker is Jaquette Knightley. Jaquette, please press *6 and you will have 2 minutes to provide public comment.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. Thank you for your service, hard work, and listening ear. I am Jaquette Knightley, drag entertainer within West Hollywood and beyond. I too am in favor of increasing our city's minimum wage via an ordinance similar to Santa Monica. And I'd just like to ask for clarification. Is there information available to proportion the recent increase of poverty level within West Hollywood to 11%? In other words, what ratio of that 11% is due to business closures specifically within West Hollywood? Is that information available?
The council can't engage with individuals speaking under public comment, but I will take down your name and number and have a member of staff follow up with you on that inquiry.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Did you have any further comment, Jaquette?
Nope, that is it. Thank you very much.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I'm going to try calling some of our speakers who I know are in the meeting, but didn't unmute themselves. So I will start with Albert Munoz. Albert, please press *6 and you will have 2 minutes to provide public comment. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, and hello, West Hollywood City Council. My name is Albert Munoz. I'm a resident of West Hollywood and a labor organizer. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of raising the minimum wage. When my partner and I moved to Southern California, we chose West Hollywood as our home because of its progressive values. As a resident, I think it's shameful that the city now has one of the lowest minimum wages in the region. As a labor organizer, I've seen the positive impact increasing wages has on an employer's ability to recruit and retain experienced staff, and the impact it's had on families' abilities to provide housing, food, and education. Our entire community benefits from raising the minimum wage. I urge the city to act now by drafting 2 ordinances mirroring that of Santa Monica and Los Angeles, a minimum wage ordinance and a hotel worker minimum wage ordinance. Thanks for hearing me out on this important issue.
Thank you, Albert. I'm going to call a couple of the other individuals who we knew are in the meeting but didn't respond. Aurelia Gonzalez, please press *6 and you will have 2 minutes to provide public comment. And Sarah, she may need translation assistance. Thank you.
Aurelia puede prender su micrófono y tiene 2 minutos y puede presionar *6 y empezar su comentario público.
Buenas noches, mi nombre es Aurelia González. Soy recamarera en la ciudad de Santa Mónica por los últimos 20 años. Cuando estaba trabajando en mi hotel, ganaba un sueldo muy bajo. Conjunto con mi sindicato, pudimos pasar el sueldo digno en nuestra ciudad. Fuimos a audiencias y gracias a Dios se logró pasar. El impacto lo sentimos inmediatamente mis compañeras y yo. Antes del sueldo digno, lo que nos daban las compañías era solo un aumento de 20 centavos. Con el sueldo digno, yo pude mover a mi familia a un apartamento más grande y pude vivir más confortable. El sueldo digno cambió mi vida y sé que cambiaría a los trabajadores de West Hollywood. Les pido por favor que voten sí al sueldo digno para todos los trabajadores de West Hollywood. Buenas noches y muchas gracias.
Yes, my name is, I'm sorry, I lost her name. I apologize.
Aurelia Gonzalez.
Aurelia Gonzalez. Thank you. I've worked in housekeeping for 20 years. Santa Monica, and part of the union. We went through hearings, and it has really changed my life. Me and my family moved to a larger apartment and living more comfortable. Before it was only a 20-cent increase. I know that the rest of my co-workers have also benefit from this, and we urge you to vote yes for the dignified wage for the city as well.
Thank you, Sarah. The next speaker requires translation as well. Angel Manrique, if you could please press *6, you will have 2 minutes to provide public comment.
Ángel Manrique, si desea prender su micrófono y presionar *6, puede dar su comentario público.
Okay. Is there anyone else in the meeting who wishes to provide public comment and hasn't been provided the opportunity? Please use the raise hand feature and I will call on you.
Si hay alguien que desea dar un comentario público y no tiene la oportunidad, puede levantar la mano virtual.
Okay, Mayor, I don't see anyone who wishes to provide further public comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It is just shy of 8 o'clock. I expect we're going to have some things to discuss. How about we take a 10-minute break and come back to have our discussion?
Read in my mind, Mayor. That's what I was saying.
We'll come back 5 after 8. Thanks. Okay. Looks like we're just waiting on Councilmember D'Amico.
Pardon me, per interpreter, will you be needing interpretation services for the rest of the evening?
No, thank you, Sarah. We appreciate your assistance this evening.
Thank you. Have a lovely night.
You too.
Thank you. All right. And so now, oh, Mayor Pro Tem Meister.
I'm just wondering if we were able to ask a few more questions.
Oh, absolutely. That's the whole point. Go right ahead.
Great, thank you. So I have really just two more questions. One is if someone can tell me what, at least for the city of LA, what the difference is between the minimum wage ordinance and the hotel minimum wage ordinance. I'd be interested in understanding that. And then my second question is, can staff tell us what the poverty levels are for the city of Los Angeles and for the city of Santa Monica, since those are the two cities that were referenced most by speakers. And I guess, and the last thing I heard was that our poverty level, did we say it was about 13%, 14%? Is that right? No. Maybe David Juni can.
No, that's correct. I believe it's 14%.
Okay, so I'd like to know what it is for the city of LA and the city of Santa Monica.
Let us look. I know that is in the community study, not for the city of Santa Monica and the city of LA, but for the county of LA as a whole. I believe it's 17 or 18%. I believe we're a little bit lower than the county as a whole. I don't know what the city of Santa Monica is and the city of Los Angeles is off the top of my head. The difference between the two wage ordinances is the minimum wage in Los Angeles is currently $15 per hour, and the hotel worker minimum wage is currently $17.64 per hour.
Thank you.
If I can add on a little bit to the minimum wage for, the minimum hotel worker wage for Los Angeles. So their particular ordinance applies to hotels with 150 or more hotel rooms.
And I'll just jump in regarding the poverty levels in the city of Los Angeles. The welfareinfo.org website says that city of Los Angeles is the poverty rate is currently 20.4%, and the poverty rate in Santa Monica is 10.7%. This is based on 2017 American Community Survey 5-year.
Thank you, Tara.
And the only additional information we had from the community study was that, as you said, the city of West Hollywood's poverty rate was 14% and the LA County rate was 18%.
And Tara, the city of West Hollywood's rate from the report that you just looked at, just so I have an understanding of if it's the same as the community study.
Let me just double check. I think David Juni, you said it had risen 1% to 14% this recent year.
Correct. I actually think your information was more recent. The information for the community study for that was based on the American Community Survey, which is 2016.
Okay, so yeah, in the census, it's just pulling this up. Based in 2019 census data, it is 11.7% of the poverty rate in West Hollywood.
Councilmember Erickson.
Thank you so much, Mayor. And I want to thank all the members of the public that spoke tonight and offered opinions, as well as to staff for a very comprehensive outreach and all of the stuff they've been doing for quite some time in the staff report. I've been trying to think about ways in which we could formulate some direction here and then potentially have a discussion. So I'm going to go through a few points and then kind of talk about my reasoning behind them. So I wanted to talk about first in the staff report. The goal is to right now, I think, in my opinion, make the living wage $19.35 with no distinction of those that have health insurance or don't provide health insurance, and to have staff come back with probably the fiscal impacts of doing that increase with a timeline and analysis of phasing. Ultimately, as well, I think regarding the minimum wage, once we hit 15 on January 1st, 2022, I think it's important we apply CPI that same year, and then we apply CPI each subsequent year after for 26 employees or more, and for 25 employees or less, we can keep them at the same standard for the state until 2023. And at that time, we also add CPI moving forward in that coming year. Coming back to this hotel worker minimum wage, I think it's important we, as of January 1st, 2022, align with the city of Los Angeles and Santa Monica at $17.64. That is then adjusted annually by CPI. Regarding sick time, come back with the following for hotel workers. Apply the city of LA standard, which is 96 hours compensated and 80 hours not compensated. And then for everyone else, and this is the Santa Monica of what they've done, for large businesses, 26 or more employees, 72 hours, and for small businesses, 25 or less employees, 40 hours. And then some of the things that through the previous staff reports that were sent through us, which thank you for the additional reading at 2 p.m., Madam Mayor, that we got. I am looking at coming back with an ordinance that has the City of Santa Monica's learners provision, nonprofit provisions, definition of employee, limited provisions for transitional job programs, service charge provision, which states that service charges remain properly of staff, not employer, and can be retained by employer. The collective bargaining exemption, except that, and this is the caveat because we're doing this later, determining the number of employees should be using the average number of employees from 2019 for each year up into 2024, not the prior year, because it would be off. And then in 2024, revert to the usage of the prior calendar year as we would normally do. And then I think in large conversation about what a minimum wage through the additional direction that staff requested for minimum wage to get us eventually to a higher wages than what I've specifically outlined here. It'd be great if we could look at the studies utilizing the options presented by staff, the survey. I don't have a preference on Berkeley or UCLA, an economic impact study. I would like to know that cost, and then obviously the advocacy group. So that's kind of how I'm framing my conversation, and I would like to give that direction to staff and the city attorney.
Okay, that was a strong, hot opinion coming in first. Anybody else have comments or discussion? Councilmember Shine.
Yeah, I also want to thank everybody who spoke. I also want to thank my colleagues for all the questions this evening and the information that staff has brought to us was all very helpful. I've been jotting down my notes here. Councilmember Erickson, I think that all of your points are very reasonable. I think that given that we have heard from our businesses as well as our workers, the businesses have been hurting because of the pandemic, and the workers have been hurting because of having lower wages in the city of West Hollywood for the past few years compared to the city of LA and Santa Monica, but also hurting because of the pandemic. We heard arguments about inflation and the cost of goods to businesses. Well, inflation also hurts consumers. And while businesses can get wholesale prices, us consumers cannot. And that's something important to think of. I think as we have been talking a lot about compromises and finding something reasonable, Councilmember Erickson, I want to commend you. This is very reasonable. And I agree with everything that you have pointed out here, and I'm eager to also hear your
some more from you about your reasonings for each of these. I will say that it's really important, as we were listening and all the questions we were asking, it just really struck me that a former resident, it was very touching, his testimony, that he was working as a concierge and not making enough money and gathering bottles to go recycle. Trying to figure out how much more can I make aside from the work that I'm doing? What more can I do? We had another worker talk about working 2 jobs and having 5 kids. We talked about giving 50% of our income to rent. And somehow, I think it was David Juni that said, well, now that's become acceptable. Unfortunately for me, that's not acceptable. And we shouldn't sit there and think that's acceptable. We've got to figure out ways to shift wages for working families. And even if wages, I think Councilmember Erickson, you asked about, even at $19.35, does this take someone out of poverty? And the answer was no. We heard that you basically need to make $51. But what it does do is kind of calculating for myself, $19.35 compared to 14, and how much you end up getting, and multiplied by 40, and that's not even counting if you maybe work overtime or work another job, but that's almost, I think it was like $800 more. $800 more. That's half of a rent payment. That's potentially a car payment. It is buying maybe that extra toy for your kid. It is being able to say, yeah, you know what, instead of saying no to going out and socializing, it's maybe I will go out to Joey's and spend that extra money. It makes a big difference. And I think that as much as personally, I wish the pandemic had not hit in this time, and I wish we were all having a different conversation and doing a higher wage to start. I think it's very reasonable, what you've proposed. And I also think it is reasonable based on feedback we've gotten from our businesses with their estimated recovery time, as well as the study and time we can put into all of the different proposals to get more input and study that and come up with something that will make West Hollywood more competitive. But this, by January, this makes us competitive with other cities. And with this labor shortage, it will be news that workers across Los Angeles County will hear. I've heard from businesses saying, well, I can't, for some reason, I keep raising my wages because you can't hire bussers. And maybe because workers aren't looking at West Hollywood because they know that West Hollywood doesn't pay as much as Los Angeles or Santa Monica. But they will know as of January that come to us. And let's not underestimate the amount that morale can contribute to a business. Higher morale, giving more wages lets people know they are worthy. You are worthy. And that is what we are telling you. No matter what, you work for us, your morale is higher, you will be more loyal, you will smile more and look forward to coming to work. And hopefully by making more, you're a little less tired and you give that extra customer service. So those are my thoughts.
Mayor, I forgot my reasoning, which might help. And I know that might help a little bit here. So I just wanted to provide that before, and then I'll be quiet because I know I spoke out and came out hot and heavy. I don't speak much about my personal life in this way, but August 15th, 2016 is the day I decided I was going to run for the city council, when the city council at that time did not pass the minimum wage standard here. I have a former partner of 10 years, and this is something that impacted someone in my household directly. The dollar that it would have given him at his service-based industry at that time could have helped change his life, but give him a little bit more comfort. Luckily, he had me. I had a great job working for the city of West Hollywood, but I too was counting my pennies and nickels when I had to do a student loan payment or a rent payment because I live here and have a lot of fun being in the city of West Hollywood. But I saw the drastic impact that this has had on someone I love and someone that I saw a council decision when I wasn't on there at that time hurt. That was the moment I said to him that if I ever got into a position where I could do change and to help the workers and help do whatever I could to right that wrong, I would. And that's why we're here today. That's why I believe I'm here today. But ultimately, this is about a reasonable compromise in the way in which I think I framed it. We're not coming in here hot like some people probably have accused me of doing or saying, but I think this is how we find the middle and how we can get there. How we get higher is something that I've of course supported, but ultimately that requires study, that requires community input, that requires business input, but more importantly, that requires us all to look at that forward. But becoming competitive plus CPI with everyone else, along with living wage, sick pay and everything, is something that would change and impact the life of someone that I love dearly and have loved dearly for 10 years. And I've seen what minimum wage standards and poverty level wages have caused. That's a lack of healthcare, that's a lack of insecurity, and that's the lack of ability to even go home and see their family on the holidays. To have to live out here and work day in and day out to barely ever get ahead. We're not doing anything radical here. I wish we were. But that's the decision that we have to take in here, how we find compromise and move forward. So that's a little bit more of my reasoning. It's more personal, but ultimately that's how all these impacts and decisions have on so many of us. So thank you, Mayor, and I'll stop talking now.
Okay. Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I think that we should be competitive with LA, and we have to be competitive not only in terms of what we put out, but also how much people have to spend to buy things, because obviously that will have an effect on, where people go to dinner, where people shop. My question is on the living wage. I would request that we do a little more study on what the impacts will be on the city's budget and what the impacts will be on our social services agencies, because we're not in the greatest shape right now. I mean, in terms of our budget, and I'm sure that social service agencies are going through similar, similar issues. So I would just suggest on that portion that maybe we study that a little bit more. I know that I think we just recently increased the CPI. I mean, we increased the hourly with the CPI added to it. And so I don't see that as being a big rush. So I would just suggest that we study a little bit further, because it does affect our budget, which ultimately affects our constituents. Our residents. So that would be my suggestion.
And Mayor Pro Tem, if you feel comfortable, I know that you and Councilmember D'Amico had initially initiated an item about living wage as it relates to development agreements. So I didn't hear that in the discussion that Councilmember Erickson brought forward. So is there any additional direction you'd like to give with regard to development agreements and any language you'd like in development agreements, or does this proposal cover what you were intending to do?
Yeah, well, I think with development agreements, it wasn't only development agreements, it was also public benefit projects, any project really that gets something from us. I think it should be considered, and I'm okay with it being case by case, as long as it is a consideration and a discussion item in the staff reports when those types of projects come to us.
Okay, I know that that was your initial item. I just want to make sure we also address that part of it.
Thank you.
Councilmember D'Amico?
I only have a couple of comments, and I guess one is maybe a history question. But my memory is we've only ever had one vote about minimum wage, and we passed a minimum wage, which raised the wage higher than any of our neighboring cities, but just didn't look out 8 years. It looked out 2 years, I think. So I appreciate everyone's sort of minimizing the efforts that the city made, but we actually voted on a minimum wage and we increased it, as I assume we will do again. You know, we don't have to be bad in order to do good things. We can be good and do good things. And this sort of demonizing of the city council past and how, you know, Abby didn't do her job and Heilman didn't do his job and John Duran didn't do his job or Jeff didn't do his job or I didn't do my job. We did our job. We raised the minimum wage beyond what any of our neighboring cities had, beyond what the state was contemplating. And then the state made a bigger choice, which we eventually adopted and we're about to come to the end of. So I appreciate everyone's comments. They're heard and understood, but I just think that this sort of era of everybody is always wrong and you're doing it wrong and you never did it right is tiresome. We want people to earn a living wage. We want people to earn salaries that help them take care of their families. We wanted to do that 5 years ago. We've wanted to do that for 35 years in this city. So we're not actually at a pivot point. We're just continuing down the path we've always been at. And so I think, John, Councilmember Erickson, you've made some excellent suggestions. I'm not really sure what this fanaticism about Santa Monica is. I mean, I don't know what 1763 means. It sounds to me like we should have a $20 minimum wage, but if 1763 is the one that Unite Here is pushing, then they're the experts clearly. But it just seems to me like for some reason, this fetishization of what they do in Santa Monica, when that is a city that has almost nothing to do with us, except for that when we come to these questions, we're rushed with this idea that we can't do it right and the 7 of them are the only ones who get it right. So I'm willing to do what you want, John. I mean, you have a much clearer line of communication with Danielle and others at Unite Here than I do. But in my mind, we have actual questions about what it means to pay people who work in our city and the kinds of outlays we want to make. Yes, we have a big surplus, and yes, we could live with the surplus that didn't grow as quickly. And I'm willing to make that choice as a council member. It sounds like we're all willing to make that choice. And I'm also, you know, I am interested in how we roll this out. I think it's fair to our businesses to give them the kind of warning the state discussed when it made these decisions. I think there are good reasons and to think carefully about how quickly we move. It's likely that it won't be fast enough for some, and it's likely that it will be too fast for others, which means it's probably going to be the right speed. So I support this effort. I support what we're doing. I just have to say, I mean, I listened super carefully. I did a lot of research while people were talking. If you saw me looking at my other computer, I was trying to figure out, like, what is this fascination with Santa Monica and that wage? Because I just don't see that it has much bearing on what it means to work or live or play in West Hollywood, but maybe it does, and I'm willing to go there. And I had a little correspondence with Genevieve, who texted me regarding the cost of insurance to employees of large businesses. And I think there still remains a confusion that if you work for a place like Starbucks or Target, your insurance is free. It is not free. Starbucks, I was able to find most employees, at least according to what I read, pay $49 to $75 a month for insurance. At Target, they pay up to $7,800 a year for insurance or healthcare costs or healthcare, based on the cost of premiums and healthcare combined, if I read that correctly. So I'm very much interested in removing this question of having healthcare or not having healthcare. Healthcare is a cost that is taken out of your wages, whether you work for somebody who prints a check and hands it to you that has a wet signature on it, or somebody who direct deposits it into your account. Healthcare is a cost and it's a requirement. So in my mind, it should be that we pay people the same amount regardless of whether they have a job in a 2-person business or they have a job in a 2,000 person or 2 million person business. With that said, whoever makes a motion, I'm happy to support the direction. But I do want to say that I think we should think bigger and think wiser than maybe even some of our staunchest advocates, because they have their own concerns and they are about a micro moment in the city's history. And our longevity and long history of leading on this is, I think, bigger than $17.63, because, you know, that's what one constituent representative thinks is the important thing to do. I think the real important thing to do is really understand what we're doing and then do it. And I just want to make one last suggestion, and that is that we ask businesses to report on their receipts and on their bills and on their folios for hotels that we as a city decided this, and here is the cost of it. And so your $48 meal costs you $56 because we as a city decided that we wanted to pay a higher wage, and not have any lack of clarity about it. I think we're asking that. We're asking that of our residents. We're asking that of our visitors, and to believe that they can just bury it and we don't ever have to think about it. It should be thought about. It should be reminded that the cost of labor and the cost of treating people fairly needs to be rendered visible, I think, to people who live, work, and play in the city. And so those are my comments, Mayor, and I'm interested to see where we go next.
I also, if it's okay with you, would like to ask you the same. Are you comfortable with what Mayor Pro Tem directed as it relates to development agreements? And
oh yeah, I thought I put my thumb up when you were talking, but I do. I think if a developer is asking, especially along a commercial corridor, less so around housing, but along a commercial corridor, is asking for 9 stories when there's supposed to be 4, you know what? Then they should be paying workers for as long as that building exists. They should be. It should be clear that that is a place that got a benefit from our city, and the benefit that our city received was that the workers that work there earn a living wage as determined by this council on an ongoing basis.
great. I too want to thank everyone who came out to speak. I think this is clearly an issue that many people are engaged in, are fired up about, and have a lot of opinions to share and a lot of perspective and experience. And so I appreciate everyone who engaged both tonight and in the meetings that our city staff hosted to be able to gather additional information. I would like for staff to come back to us on how the language in the development agreement at the addition was enforced and the impact that it had. I think that would be useful to know how that worked. And you know, we did try it, and so I think it's important to learn from our own experience. There was a question asked by one of our commenters that I will repeat and see if we have an answer tonight. But the question, I believe, had to do with the unemployment rate and was it impacted by the closure of West Hollywood businesses.
Certainly, the unemployment rate probably was impacted by several businesses closing within the city due to the pandemic. I don't have the number. I would like to be able to compare it to sort of year over year comparisons of where we are right now in 2021 and perhaps compare it to 2019. I don't have that number off the top of my head, but I think on average, our unemployment rate before the pandemic hovered right around 4 to 5%.
And the unemployment rate is a calculation of residents of our city, correct? Not employees of the city.
That's correct. So it's likely that business closures in general throughout the entire Los Angeles region contributed to the unemployment rate increasing both in West Hollywood and throughout the entire region.
Understood. I think I'm glad to see that we are not distinguishing, as Councilmember D'Amico indicated. We're, taking a look at not distinguishing based on healthcare. I'm glad to see that we're also talking about what a living wage means, what a minimum wage means, and why we would have two separate kinds of wages. I would never want to suggest that a wage that we're authorizing in the city is not intended to provide people a living. But I think rather how we're compensating people for their work. There were very specific provisions that Councilmember Erickson suggested. And so for purposes of discussion tonight, do we, Lauren Langer, is it your intention to take the comments that were presented here tonight to work with staff to come back to us with an item, or do you need some sort of formal motion?
I think we should do a formal motion, and maybe the best way to handle it is for Councilmember Erickson to go through the points again, one by one, and make sure the full council's on board, and then we could turn that into motion and vote at the end.
Okay, before we do that, I just also wanted to mention that I know that we've heard concerns from employers who were not present tonight, but I believe perhaps participated in a session earlier this year, or maybe multiple sessions in discussion with our staff. And so I know that this study session was intended to provide opportunity for more discussion and more input, especially from those businesses who had concerns. So I'm sorry that more of them weren't able to participate tonight for whatever reason, but I do know that one issue that was raised to me by a couple of business owners is that when you raise the minimum wage, that it impacts a base level of compensation in some other way that for others. And so, Paolo, I see you nodding your head. Can you maybe talk to us a little bit about that, just so we make sure that that's understood? Is that something you're able to speak to?
Yeah, so salaried employees in the state of California have to be paid at least double the times of minimum wage. So can't do any fancy math right now off the top of my head, but I think Tara Janet might have the actual numbers. But for a $15 an hour employee, they would have to get paid double the cost of that times 2080, which is the equivalent of a full-time employee.
Understood. So I think as we're understanding the impact of the living wage on the city's budget or the city's services. I think we also want to understand that impact too as it relates to salaries. I think that, that point was important for businesses to raise, and I think should be part of our discussion analysis as we're moving forward. Just so we have an appreciation, understanding of how that works. But I am glad to see that we're moving in a direction of sort of filling in the middle. There's a surrounding area that has participated in a higher wage than where we're at right now. And I'm glad to see that we're filling that in. I'm glad to see we're moving in a direction that, and it appears perhaps as a whole council moving in a direction that takes us a step forward. And while I appreciate that we are hearing that we need to be sensitive about this time as businesses are getting back up and running, but I also think we want to make sure that the jobs that people are going back to are ones that afford them a livelihood that allows them to take care of themselves and their families. And I think this helps us move forward in that direction as well, which I think is a worthy goal. So Councilmember Erickson, I didn't quite get it all the first time you read it through. I wrote down some of it, but you were quite speedy. So let's go through, if you would, point by point to make sure we're all on the same page.
Of course, and I apologize. I actually typed up my notes this time, so that's why I was so efficient. And I want to thank Councilmember D'Amico for his comments. I really appreciate what he has to say, and when I get to that point, I want to discuss what he talked about with being bold and how we look at that. So I'll get there on, I think it's point 3. So the first one would be, the goal is to make the living wage $19.35 with no distinction regarding health insurance and those that don't have it and those that have it, and for staff to come back with fiscal impacts of doing such an increase, and with a timeline and an analysis of the phasing. And as a part of that analysis, include Mayor Pro Tem Meister's points regarding impacts to city budget, social service agencies. And I believe David Wilson at the beginning of the meeting said, at this start date, based on phasing and timeline, we can deal with in the future, because staff will develop a timeline based on the appropriate contractual schedule before then. Correct?
Okay, so is everybody clear on that point?
I'm clear on it, but can we just have it say at least 1935?
I am fine with that.
Is anybody in disagreement? Okay. So that's the one of your points on living wage. I think the next one you had the minimum wage.
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor. So come back with the following. So once we hit $15 on January 1st, 2022, we apply CPI that same year. And then moving forward, we apply CPI each subsequent year after, for 26 employees or more. And for 25 employees or less, we keep them at the same standard that the state has them until 2023, at which time we would then add CPI moving forward that year and each subsequent year.
Okay, Janet has a question.
Just a clarifying question, Councilmember Erickson, because starting in 2024, the state's wages are all based on CPI. So then it would just be for 26 or more starting 22. Correct?
So you're talking about how there will be a separation between the 26 and the 25 below, right? At that certain time?
Well, from 24 on, then CPI would apply to everyone from 24 on.
Forward.
And then did you mention earlier, and I'm sorry if I'm jumping around, would nonprofits then be included in the 25 or fewer? Because that was previous.
I'll get there.
Let's get to that later.
All right, thank you.
Councilmember Shine, you had a question?
Yes, I guess a question for Councilmember Erickson based on what Janet brought up. I guess I thought that what you're proposing is that we're creating our own wage and not
Yes,
really
sorry,
following the
thank
state
you.
anymore, right?
Sorry, thank you. That is the important point right there, that this would be to answer staff's bullet point in the direction that they needed, the creation of our own minimum wage outside of what the state has, because the state is just 15 as of 2022, and we would be 15 plus CPI.
So, Councilmember D'Amico.
I don't think that's enough. I mean, I don't know that it, but 2% of $15 is 30 cents. I mean, I'm just confused. I thought we were setting a minimum wage. And I mean, if we're just going to go to start adding CPI to the state's wage, we're not really setting a minimum wage. We're just, you know, sort of doing nothing, frankly. I mean, 30 cents is 30 cents. I don't want to minimize how very complicated it is to make 30 cents more per hour, but I guess I just sort of thought we were going to sort of do what we did in 2016, which is say, you know, over the next 2 years, we want to raise the wages, and then maybe the state will do something or maybe they won't. But in our city, our minimum wage is going to be, you know, I mean, I think we raised it $2 from $10 to $12. And then the state came up and said it'll be 11, then 12, then 13, then 14, then 15, now 2021. So I guess I'm happy to vote for it. If this is what the other four want to do is just add the CPI, but I thought we were asking for a calculation of what the minimum wage should be. For me, that wouldn't start on January 1st, 2022. It would start perhaps on January 1st, 2023, you know, so perhaps a CPI for a year and then an actual raise in the minimum wage. But that's just, and again, John, if I'm not understanding what you're actually doing, then just, you know, go like this and I'll quiet down. But like, I'm trying to get, like, I thought we were sort of stepping out and saying, we're going to do this. We're making a new minimum wage. We are the tallest pole in the tent. And like we did in 2016 for obviously 2 months till the state did it. But that would be, you know, that's what I thought we were doing.
David Wilson.
I thought I understood Councilmember Erickson's comments earlier to be we'd be going to the $15 plus CPI in these first few years, but we're still doing the study on whether we want to go higher for later years. So
Yeah,
we're not just sticking with the state plus CPI.
Yeah, I was going to say that. I mean, the one thing I heard, and I think you make a great point, John, and one thing that I heard really with talking with businesses and community members was during the pandemic, what we're doing right now, you know, a drastic increase, but how can we be responsive with the items laid out in the staff report that I talked about, with the goal of actually getting us higher, exactly what you're talking about earlier by 2023, 2024, but to give staff, I think, the time to come back by doing community outreach, doing a study, utilizing those tools to then come back to us. And then we be even bolder when we come back. So we can actually understand impacts, the questions that need to be asked. And I think even I know the mayor mentioned the salary impacts and what she'd heard about as well. So giving staff that time to come back to us to study it, but then increasing it now plus CPI, and then knowing that in a year, we're going to have this conversation and go higher.
So do we have agreement on that, or a different vision for that piece?
I support that, but I do have a different vision. I think we need to be bolder right now, but I understand, John. Absolutely. I think that is also a good way to move forward.
Okay. I think the next piece, John, Councilmember Erickson, you had is hotel wage.
Yes, thank you. And you gotta be careful when we say John's now. I always laugh when we say it. So the following minimum worker wage, but what I did hear Councilmember John D'Amico say is, so I'm going to tailor this a little bit. So by January 1st, 2022, align us with Los Angeles and Santa Monica at the lowest 1764, but coming back up to 20. And And then that therefore would be adjusted annually by CPI. So for staff to come back and look at that and go as high up to 20 an hour if they want, sorry, I'm getting word salad in my mouth. Let me repeat it so it's much more clear because I'm not making sense. By January 1st, 2022, aligning us with Los Angeles and Santa Monica at 1764 and coming back up to us. How should I say this? Sorry, I'm having word salad here because I want to make sure that we're coming at in the way in which, this is if we want to go up to $20. I mean, I heard Councilmember D'Amico, that's the wording I'm looking for, say we could go higher instead of just 1764 in his comments that he said earlier. So I'm happy to explore when this comes back to us going up to $20, but having the base rate be 1764, which is the Los Angeles and Santa Monica standard. But we could be bigger if we wanted to when this comes back. So giving that direction to go from that range up to 20 when they come back with this amount.
Is everyone clear about what that is?
I guess the only question I have is that these are fairly big corporations, most of them, and they probably have fiscal years that start in maybe not always on January 1st. So I wonder how complicated it would be to give them at least 6 months, perhaps do it on April 1st. I understand that, these are people's wages and we're making decisions based on corporate problems, but I do think we've already asked them to turn pretty heavy in one direction, and we're asking them to turn a different part of their organization in another direction. But again, I support this idea. I just think that there's likely some additional considerations regarding how this all works itself out. But again, I'm going to support this however we as a council move forward.
I do think that starting with this rate is rooted in research that's been done, that we've done already. So I am comfortable with that rate, at least as a starting point. And perhaps if we're talking about going to a higher wage, making sure that it's rooted in addition, in understanding why we're going to that rate. Because I think to your point, Councilmember D'Amico, there's room to go higher, but I think we want to do it based on actual information and not just kind of plucking a number. And so I think what this direction allows us to take action in a shorter term, while allowing for us to get the information we need to move to that higher number, if that's where we want to go. Everyone comfortable with that? Okay, Councilmember Shine.
Just a clarification, Councilmember Erickson, did you also have here that you wanted the adjusted annually by CPI as well for the hotel wage, correct?
Yes, in one of my word salads, I said that originally, and then I came back and said another thing. So thank you for adding that additional comment that I said, Councilmember Shine.
Okay, the next section I believe you mentioned was sick time.
Yes, thank you. So for specifically hotel workers, we're looking at applying Los Angeles' standard, which is 96 hours compensated, 80 hours not compensated. And then for everyone else, for larger businesses specifically, of 26 or more employees, 72 hours, and then small businesses of 25 or less employees, 40 hours. And that's, I say, every time I say the word City of Santa Monica, I don't want to trigger you, Councilmember D'Amico. So I'm sorry, I feel bad saying it, but that's the easiest. I know in talking with staff over these items by saying the City Monica standard, they can go back and look at their code easier than what it was before, than just willy-nilly stuff.
Is everyone comfortable? Mayor Pro Tem Meister.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if we can have staff bring back City of LA and City of Santa Monica so that we can decide at that time, because I'm still not clear what all the differences are. And so I would like to be able to really look at that before we make that decision to go with the City of SM. So.
Yes, I think that's completely reasonable.
Great. So we'll have that analysis as to how they got to those hours, if we can, to the extent that we can get that, I think that would be helpful. I think you have nonprofits. Is that what's next?
Yeah, so this is this encompasses a lot of aspects, and this was thankful and really helpful with the previous staff report. So the City of SM, and looking at what they've done in terms of how they have applied this in their ordinance to learners provisions, nonprofit provisions, definition of employee, limited provision for transitional job programs, service charge provisions, which states that service charges remain property of staff, not employer, and cannot be retained by employers. Collective bargaining agreements are exemption. And then this is the point, and I'm going to phrase it so it's clear. In addition to how we are determining the number of employees that should be used for the average number of employees, from making sure they're using from 2019 for each year up until 2024, not the prior calendar year that they normally would. And then in 2024, revert to the same standard that they normally have by looking at the previous year, the prior year, because there's obviously the pandemic impact. Because if they're looking at 2020 and it's 2021, there's going to be a completely set of off numbers. And that's going to continue for, from what I've seen through my own individual research, at least 2 to 3 years. So putting that to 2024, if that makes sense, Mayor, sorry.
Everybody clear on that? Anybody have a different point of view? Okay. What else do you, that was the last thing I had written down that you said.
Well, I have 2 more, and I don't have to say any other cities' names now. But in addition to giving a direction based on what staff was requesting for outreach and study, and this applies back to how we would go higher potentially in the city, but getting that economic impact study down, but including what a cost of that economic impact study would be, utilizing Berkeley or UCLA's labor report and how they did that. I don't know if anyone has a preference on either. The survey, the confidential survey that would be done and how we would do it. And then Janet, and the working group, I'm sorry, that would be a part of this to study any potential increase in wages.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, I guess I'm just questioning why we would now need the survey of employees or the working group of employees, since we are moving forward with raising wages. I'm just asking.
Yeah.
I will tell you that a study that is like 400 employees is going to be like $80,000. I do believe we need to do the economic study and the impacts of an economic study. I can tell you from experience as being in a market research industry that we're talking about a very, if you're talking about 400 employees and trying to get it so that we have representative of each industry, or at least our top 10, 15 industries, it's not going to be cheap. And I'm just wondering, because the whole reason I brought it up was because I felt that we didn't talk to enough employees about how they felt about it, especially restaurant employees who were dealing with, tipped wages. So that was my point, is that we hadn't really talked to that industry of employees. But if we're already going to assume that we're moving forward with something, I'm not sure. I guess I'm not clear what the point is then. And is it worth $80,000 to do it? I'd rather see that money go into an economic study and see what the impacts of the raises are going to be on our businesses, on our residents, on the elderly, our older adults, and when it comes to the living wage, what that impact will be on our budget and on some agencies.
I'm fine with not doing a survey. I was just trying to put as much out there, but I completely agree with you, Mayor Pro Tem, that I would rather see that money spent on exactly what you're talking about with how we can look at this efficiently and cost effectively.
Okay, so we're not doing the study or the working group.
I think we can do the working group. We weren't gonna do the survey piece, right? Mayor Pro Tem, is that what the survey?
What was the working group exactly? Was that, if it was employers, I would say we should do it. If it's employees, I'm not really sure, because we were saying we want to think this and blah, blah, blah. And that's why you would have a quantitative, survey, not.
It was employers as well as advocacy-based groups, and what Councilmember Shine said it in her comments.
I believe this was staff suggestion.
Yeah.
Okay, I would say yes on that.
Okay.
We need to do an $80,000 survey on, on wages if we already know what we're doing.
Councilmember Shine.
Yeah, and that was a question I asked staff about the working group. And really, I like that idea because it brings community together. It actually brings residents, it brings business owners, it brings workers, it brings advocacy groups, labor chambers, and to come together, to work together and come up with some input. I think it's beneficial to get everyone at the same table talking. Yes.
Lauren Lincoln.
I just wanted to make one suggestion for the working group, and that would be to just direct the city manager to come up and implement the working groups rather than formally creating it by the city council, because any body that the city council creates is a formal Brown Act body. But if the city manager comes up with working groups, there's a little more flexibility to get the information you need without using so much resources and formality.
I'm fine with that.
Are there any other?
I believe the last point was the case-by-case basis for development agreements that we would continue. And I know Mayor Pro Tem and Councilmember D'Amico talked about that piece.
Okay.
And I think that's it, Mayor.
All right. So David Wilson.
Sorry, can we just go back to the hotel workers? So are we bringing forth an ordinance for 1764 for January 1st, or are we looking at analyzing higher rates first?
I would like to come back by January 1st, 2022 with 1764. And then as part of that working group, we could continue to look at how it would be raised higher if you want to give direction in that area too.
Okay.
Is that everybody's understanding?
That is my understanding. I just want to say that, if it takes 6 weeks to get this on an agenda, I'm just not, I just think we need to give like 90 days notice or 120 days notice in the ordinance for when it begins. And January 1st it's a perfect date, but we have to set up organizations to succeed and to sort of tell them on, October 18th that 2 months and 2 major holidays away, they need to shift their entire payroll and they're, organizing their employees. And maybe it's not a concern. Maybe the city manager can, convince me, having been in charge of payroll and finance for so many years, it's just, 10 keystrokes somewhere in the corporate office and then it's done. But I have a sense it's a bigger deal than that. So I don't want us to get lost in January 1st when the bigger question is how do we raise the wages appropriately?
Yeah, no, and I agree. I think that's a pretty quick turnaround considering we'd have to put it on another agenda and have a second reading and all those things that go along with it. I would look for at least 6 months from now.
Right. So maybe it can be 90 or 120 days from the second reading, and then that certainly give 3 months is, that's a whole quarter cycle. That gives organizations a chance to do their thing.
Is this for all the provisions that were going into effect on January 1 or just for the hotel worker? Because my understanding was the direction was the sick time provisions went into effect on January 1st, as well as the CPI increase for the minimum wage.
I'm not trying to make this more complicated. I'm willing to step back from this discussion and let smarter heads prevail.
Okay, so before, I know that both Mayor Pro Tem and Councilmember Shine keep raising their hands, so I want to clarify the point for John Leonard and then get to them on their comments. So Councilmember Erickson, is your motion, is that aspect of waiting the 90 or 120 days part of your motion? And if so, for which portions of it?
I believe we should stick to the January 1st, 2022 date. And, that's kind of where I'm sticking to on the calendar year at the moment.
Okay.
I'm just, everything else is January 1st, 2022, but I'm hearing hotel worker stuff right here, so.
Okay, so you're saying everything is January 1st?
Yes.
Okay.
I believe it's hotel workers minimum wage adjustment by the CPI and sick leave.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mayor Pro Tem Meister.
I would just say that I agree with Councilmember D'Amico that we should give them a little more time, because this is going to be a deal for them. So I think with everything that we've gone through the last couple of months with the changes and still having to deal with COVID and the effects of COVID, and it's not over yet, I just think we need to give them more time.
Councilmember Shine.
Sure. I would say let's look at what we're doing. We're talking about CPI 35 cents, as Councilmember D'Amico said. With the raise in the hotel workers' wage, actually a lot of the hotels are already offering higher wages because they want to attract more workers due to what they have said is a labor shortage. This puts us in competition with Los Angeles and Santa Monica to attract the workers and get them after the holidays come to our city. And I think honestly, it's a motion to come back and we can have more discussions, and we'll probably get public comment and input at that time too, to consider it. I think that's, for me, that's a good time to decide this last point when we have something in front of us and more comments and input.
Okay, Councilmember D'Amico.
I would agree, Seppi, and it was never about the money change. It was about, if you work at Target, you have to go through all 250 of your employees and change their wage and, make sure that it's calculated correctly. And it's, I'm just saying it was never about worrying that the hotel couldn't afford a 30% increase in their, 40 minimum or just above minimum wage employees. It was always just, I just don't want somebody to not get paid. And then there's a whole thing. And then they cheated me. And and then the organization's just like, I just couldn't get it together. You passed this in October and then it was Thanksgiving and, everybody. So that was it. And I hope we hear that it can be fine since we're going to pass it. Maybe organizations will say, you know what, it's death by 1,000 cuts. Let's just do it on January 1st instead of waiting, till February 14th, which is 90 days from October 16th or something.
I hope that Target has the ability to call their ADP payroll or some other big payroll company and say, hey, put it in one and it affects everyone. I know that personally, I do, in addition to my law practice, I do contract work for firms, and the rates vary, and it's just, you're hired 2 days later, bam. And so it's, with technology these days, it is absolutely doable. I don't think that we are going to be causing such a huge detriment. And I'm sure, like I said, with the news going out, the first to know are going to be the businesses, and I have no doubt the chamber will send the news out to everyone so they make sure that they're complying with the law. And that's kind of my take on that.
All right. So we're all clear on the motion. Is there a seconder to the motion? Councilmember Shine will second. Is there any further discussion on the motion?
Really want to thank my colleagues for having this conversation and discussion. I've really appreciated this, and I really appreciate how Councilmember D'Amico helped me firm up my own stances with what he was saying, and I appreciate the dream big scenario that we look at and really what does it cost in healthcare and all the conversations we're having now. Those are serious conversations we have to have.
Lauren Langer, David Wilson, Madam City Clerk, are we all clear on the language of the motion? Okay, I just want to make sure we got it while we're here. All right, so Madam City Clerk, roll call, please.
Wait. Did we say when this is coming back? I didn't hear that.
I don't think that was part of the motion.
Okay.
I wrote down that you want to have an ordinance in effect by January 1, so we would just work backwards to make sure that the second reading was at least 30 days before that. I didn't do the exact math, but that's how I was working backwards.
It will be October 18th. Will be the day we need to.
John did the math.
John did the guess. It was a guess, but yeah, there we go. Thanks, everyone.
All right, so we're all clear. Madam City Clerk.
Councilmember D'Amico.
Yes.
Councilmember Erickson.
Yes.
Councilmember Shine.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Meister.
Aye.
Mayor Horvath.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Okay, we don't even have additional public comment or council member comments since this is just a study session, but we will adjourn to our next city council meeting on Monday, September 20th. I'll see you then. Thank you all.